guess.
You always seem to get into stuff on here when I'm like I'm not gonna log on to TikTok for a few days and like I'm gonna ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist for a few days era. Like every single time I'm like, I'm too depressed for TikTok. Like when people go in on you. It's like the
This was much more fun this time though because I don't like care anymore. Like that's like the only way to put it, and not in like a nihilistic way of like I don't care about anything. No, it's just I did EMDR about people's like hate comment sort of things, and so they annoy me that they are like sound stupid. Like not to say that the people who leave them are stupid, but it's just like silly points that they're making, but they don't like bother me anymore. And
yeah.
so I was like, let's do an experiment and see what happens if I once again, talk about like Medusa, Persephone, Medusa related things because it's me talking about like Athena and things
Yeah.
like that to see what happened. Like, uh, to talk a little bit about Percy Jackson stuff, I did want to mention before I forget that there was a couple award shows that they were on. They won like one kids like kind of like a kids like show sort of award show, not like obviously the biggest one like that is like the Kids Choice Award or like the Children's Emmys. It
Mhm.
wasn't one like that, but they did win like a Best New Show award for that's just purely for like children's programming. Like Miss Rachel was up for some awards for that show, which was really sweet. I hope she won too. But there was some other award show that they were up for that they didn't win, like best casting, like the casting awards. Um, Avatar won that one. It's funny how many awards us and Avatar: The Last Airbender were up against each other on them all the time. um, and there was another award for writing, and I forget it was like a different children's show that we wouldn't really know. They won for like the best writing when they were up for um the first episode.
Mhm.
And so that's like the stuff that's going on with that right now. I did look again just because if you ever want to know all the awards they're up for, Becky had on the Mythomagic Threads account. She has a thread at the very top, a thread on Threads of all the different awards that they're up for and like the dates of the award shows and stuff.
Mhm.
And so the big one is the Children's Emmys. That is on I think it's on March 15th.
And that's the one they were nominated for like 15 or 16.
Yeah. That not only is that like like the Emmys, and so even if it's just it's the Emmys, it's a big deal regardless. And that is the one that they have 16 nominations where they're literally not exaggerating, nominated for like everything humanly possible they could be nominated for. Like there's like nothing. The only things that were left were like categories that they like could not be nominated for because they don't have those things in their show, but everything else they were nominated for. Um, so that's the stuff going on with that. Oh, besides the Seaweed Brain podcast, they posted the other day saying that they interviewed somebody from the show. They didn't say who it was, but they said that I think that interview is supposed to come out later on this week.
Mhm.
So that'll be somebody because they said they just kept to like season 2. So whoever it is, it's somebody that we would probably know from the
Well,
show.
it'd be interesting if they did some like Allison or somebody new because I know that they've done Charlie, right? And they've done Walker.
Yeah, they've done Charlie. They did an episode with Walker and Leah,
Mhm.
and they did Charlie, and I think I can't remember if they interviewed Arian, but I know the Monster Donut podcast interviewed Arian too.
Mhm.
Um, they interviewed a lot. Like they interviewed Daphne Olive, like one of the head writers from the show. They've interviewed like the Riordans before. Like they've interviewed a lot of people involved on the show, even like behind the scenes people. They interviewed like the cinematographer and the casting. Like I remember talking about this like probably 9 months ago when the cast the acting coach guy that when he was interviewed on their show, I never listened to it because I knew that it would make me cry because the like one clip of it that they posted on like Instagram was him crying, and he was talking about like how much he loves like these kids, and he was talking about how when Leah got a lot of like the racist attacks, so they were all like getting ready to film the next season, and so that helped the three of them bond. But they were he started crying when he was talking about how like each one of the trio kids have something that the other one like wants but they can never have, and it's like one of those weird things that just like bonds people together in a weird way.
Mhm.
Like Percy has a really good mom, and that's something that Annabeth's always wanted, and Annabeth has like people there that like took care of her, even if and like had people who she knew growing up knew who she really was and accepted her, which is something that Percy never had. And like both of them have people that support them unconditionally, which is kind of something that in a weird way Grover didn't have from like the other satyrs and stuff. And so it's just a very sweet interview. And so they have a lot of really good interviews in general. Them and the Monster Donut podcast, they have a lot of interviews with people involved in the show from season one. If you want to ever go back and listen to them, they're still interesting, I am sure.
Mhm.
And they both interviewed like the biggest people on the show that you would know besides the people that you wouldn't know.
Yeah.
Um, what was I? Oh, and then I'm laughing about the Christopher Nolan movie.
Oh yeah. So you sent me the Matt Damon picture. I saw it posted a couple times to Reddit too. Um,
No, that's all I can say about that. Is he also the other thing that I like wanted to make sure to remember from this week is that his I when I posted about this, I was like, this is going to be the most Christopher Nolan movie that's ever been Christopher Nolan in the history of the world, and just from like the cast, and I was just like, oh god, and um, one of the things that aged really well at the time that I said was I was like, Christopher Nolan is really weird, and so case number one of him being a freaking weirdo and saying that it's just hashtag cinema that he's a weirdo like this is that his idea for Polyphemus is to create a 6 foot tall, like
oh yeah, a puppet.
giant puppet and then like ship that all the way to Greece and then film it in a cave in Greece. And like a friend of mine was like, I'm kind of worried that he's gonna like break the cave with like a because he's going to like an ancient cave in like ancient Greece area somewhere.
Of course.
Like he absolutely would, and he'd be like, it was just part of the like process. And so of course, Christopher Nolan is making a giant puppet to be Polyphemus because that's like the most interesting thing he can think of when it comes to that character. And of course, like Matt Damon is Odysseus, which is the most boring thing on planet Earth. Like Tom Holland, why is Tom Holland in this movie if he is not Odysseus? He would be great as Odysseus.
Telemachus, maybe? Because if we're making Matt Damon Odysseus, maybe he makes sense age-wise as Telemachus.
And like I'm like kind of worried that they're gonna make Zendaya be Calypso because Calypso sometimes is like depicted as like a black woman. I guess I don't know that, but people had said that to me before.
Witchcraft, exotic, for some reason, like back then, that those things were synonymous.
Yeah, and I'm just like, oh, this is gonna be just terrible because Christopher Nolan also is not good at all at writing female characters. A lot of his female characters are like they don't really have personalities much. A lot of the time, they're
I
kind of
says she thinks Zendaya is going to be Cersei. Cersei was probably going to be my second guess.
yeah. It's got to be like Cersei or Calypso,
One of the
one of
two
them.
sea witches.
It's so stupid because they could be literally anyone. You're Christopher Nolan. You could literally make like Zendaya be Odysseus if you really want to, and nobody can question you because you're Christopher Nolan. And so it's like this is boring that you're doing like stuff like this instead. And that one picture of Odysseus as Matt Damon Odysseus, I was just like, you're old and stupid. Like,
I don't know. It's weird. I'm still like, I'm gonna wait to see what happens here. Yeah, so that was interesting.
Oh, and then the shenanigans that I was getting into was I was just thinking about this that day, whatever day that was that I posted that. Probably the last day that I had off of work until Wednesday because I had time to actually think about stuff like this. But I was just thinking about how the our myths, like mine being Medusa and hers being Persephone, that people are like so mean to us about those myths, but like even when you look at the original story of those, they still suck. Like even when you take like the nicest version of the Medusa myth, like the idea that she was born a Gorgon, and so the only thing that Athena did to her was like forcing her to like turn people into stone. You're still like making it. You're changing somebody because they got attention from like your uncle and you didn't like it. And even in like somebody in my comments today was trying to be like, oh, she was trying to protect Medusa from like other men. And I was like, I don't believe that.
That's
But
not the classics answer. That's the feminist answer, and that's the version that I like.
yeah, even if you want to believe that that is true, changing somebody's body permanently after you think they've been raped is no,
Yeah.
no, no, do that. Don't. That is just you violating them again by forcing their body to change when they don't want to. Like, it's one thing if she would have asked, but the story is not that she asked because the gods don't ask to do things like that. They just do things like that. And so even in the like the nicest version of the story, Athena is doing that to a woman then and doing nothing at all to her uncle, to her dad, to all the people that she's actually trying to kiss ass to. Like Athena to me is always that woman in like a white supremacist, like patriarchal sort of world that tries to make the men around them like her to thinking that that will make her safe or be like more accepted in this world. And the Medusa myth, whatever version of it that you like more, it doesn't really matter which one it is, to me, is her blaming Medusa for realizing that that will never happen.
Yeah.
That, like, her dad, her uncle, whoever will never look at her the way that they look at all the other, like, male gods in that world. And they won't. They won't. And so, and even with the Persephone thing, like, Demeter can be upset about that, sure, but um, even if you think that somebody you love is in a bad situation, making yourself like this at the center of it all by like making everybody know about it because you are being so overly over the top dramatic about it all that like an entire new like season is created because you are upset and it's not really about your daughter, it's about how upset you are. You are making yourself the center of everything. It's not about really your daughter, it's about you.
And your
Like
greed.
and
Yeah.
your feelings. And it's like even if you do think like this is like a whole thing when you know people that are in abusive situations, it's like that reminds me of those people you see that are like, I don't want to be friends with you anymore because you were going through a horrible abusive situation and you weren't there to like talk to me about my ex-boyfriend or like that's like an example of it. But if you want to say like a real life example of that, that one influencer, Brianna Chicken Fry, I don't know her actual last name, but her and her friend, when she was with what's his name, Zach Bryan, and then she told everybody he was abusive. I hope that's his actual name, and I'm not saying the wrong country singer. I'm sorry if it's not him. They all sound their names are all so similar to me. But when that all came out, she expected her best friend to just like let all of that stuff that happened go and forget about like an entire year of their life where she just kept defending her abusive boyfriend over her and like let him basically like push her out of her life. But like when that kind of stuff happens, there needs to be time for you to like actually talk things out. And like she didn't want to have to do that and she was upset with her and went on this whole like Brianna went on this whole thing online when she was very I'm sure that in a little bit of time she's going to regret that she did all of that.
Yeah.
As Grace is not a bad person, she just you also treated her badly when you were going through something bad, and she was affected by how you treated her. You can't just expect people to just let all of that go because you were going through a hard time yourself. It's like that sort of a dynamic where, like, yeah, I do think that Demeter was written that way to almost like make fun of um women who are upset when they had to get like married to men they didn't want to get married to, because of just how kind of over the top it is. And it's like, yeah, you can definitely grieve what that person is in your life is going through and be upset for them, but when you make it about you instead of about them, you're like you're defeating the point of how upset you actually are, or like what you're actually upset about. And that's like the whole thing with that myth is like, even if you want to believe Demeter is a really good mom and that there's nothing like necessarily bad there, she if you believe her, she knows that her daughter is married to someone she doesn't want to get married to, and she thinks that it's a somewhat abusive situation, and she's putting more attention on it on purpose because she is upset by it and she wants everybody to hear about how upset she is. That's putting that person in danger because you're just upset. And that's always the wrong thing to do. There's like never a time when you should piss off the abusive person on purpose just because you're upset. Like that's never that's never a good idea. It never goes anywhere good. The person who's involved with them is always the one that pays for it. Like when I grew up, I hated whenever I saw my dad's family because they would always piss him off. And then I would end up being the one having to deal with it later. And I knew that every time we went and saw them, that that's what was going to happen. And it's just ridiculous. like, and
I'm trying to find a space to not interrupt you, but Sky asked if we had an opportunity to read what you sent, or what she sent. I haven't yet. Did you read it? Okay, I'm gonna read it for next week.
I told her already, but I read it and then I told her I have off of work on Wednesday, so I'm going to read it again. I always read stories that people send me more than once when I'm like looking at it. And then I'll send you stuff, Sky, so that you have notes and stuff. I was going to DM you that before we started and then I forgot. But either way, on Wednesday, I'll send you stuff about what I think about it and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Because,
I
yeah.
haven't gotten a chance yet because Shannon sent me down a rabbit hole of research that I'm not going to get into next week. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah. One part of that
Related.
that we can talk about now that I'm done complaining about how people are talking about the myths, because we're the thing that we're going to talk more next week about is that the only time that we interact with polytheist or Hellenistic polytheist or anyone in that sort of realm, like I'm not exaggerating, the only time I have ever run into those people since I've been on TikTok since 2021, even before I knew her, is people saying that rape victims aren't allowed to like Medusa. That's the only time that I ever see them, and that's the only thing that they ever say to me or anyone else around me. I can like vividly remember before I ever knew you in 2021 seeing somebody make a video calmly explaining that even if you're a rape victim, you're not allowed to like Medusa because that's not a real story. And I felt like my brain was exploding. And like at that point, this is like the wild thing about me. At that point in my life, I didn't even know that people looked at Medusa like a rape victim. I had only ever heard like the other version of her myth before, like in the stuff when we studied that stuff in school when I was in like the 90s and early 2000s. I never heard the other version about her. And so that video was when I saw that there even was another version like that. And I started like after I saw that video, I like started looking up like I just put in Medusa and all these videos about like Medusa tattoos and stuff came up. And I was like, "Oh, this is really cool." And but still on that video I was just like I tried to leave a couple comments just saying like it's unbelievable that you would say something like this to real people over like a story that isn't real. Mm-hmm. Like this is just a story. It's not real. These people aren't real, but you're talking about them as if they are. That's so weird. And so we're researching. She's researching because she has all the books stuff about the whole thing with like Hellenistic polytheists that I genuinely just didn't even think about because this isn't my religion. So why would I think about it? Um, was like they always say the one generic thing they always say is like, oh, that myth is actually Roman mythology because Ovid wrote it because he was mad at this emperor. And I was like, who is this emperor?
Yeah.
Like they all say this, but none of them actually talk about this emperor. And I was like, just this one thing that he does reminds me of Orange Man because he banished like an artist from where he lives for the rest of his life because he wrote a poem he didn't like. Like that. The other thing I wanted to talk about today was like about besides Song of Achilles stuff was censorship, and I was like, this is censorship, and I was like, this is like, who is this guy that people are defending him in this weird roundabout backwards way online? Do they even know who he is? And it's like, no, they don't know who he is because we've learned who he is very thoroughly so far, and we'll know more in a week where we'll talk about it again. And I know for a fact that the people that are saying this stuff online, I know that none of you would be saying this if you actually knew who he was and
Yeah.
what he was
So
doing.
to give I'll go through a brief history synopsis, but I kind of want to I'll stick to Augustus this week, and then we'll talk more about Ovid versus Augustus next week. But just to kind of set up where we're headed with that. So Julius Caesar got assassinated, right? And after that was this huge period of civil war. But when he got assassinated, he named in his will an heir, and it was or an heir, Heir, his nephew Octavian, and Octavian fought with, I believe, Mark Antony to kind of avenge Caesar because there was people on both sides. There were people that were very pro Caesar, liked him, didn't care that he was doing this weird emperor thing where he was claiming divine lineage and also saying like he had the sacred right to rule. So there were people that were like kind of like, but Julius is a great guy. So I don't mind this so much. And Octavian banded with those people, won the Civil War, and then once he won like all of the battles that happened after Julius's assassination, he slowly took over every single religious, i.e., government office in Rome. And one thing you need to know about Rome is they are extremely superstitious. Their religion is so important to them for two main reasons. I mean, you think about it, they are soldiers and they are farmers. So when the gods are on your side, you win wars. When the gods are on your side, you have plentiful farms, like you have crops, you have the blessings of the land and the blessings of like prosperity that come with war. So they saw service to the gods as like, if we do these things as correct as possible, very ritualistic, very like perfectionist as possible, the gods will always be on our side. And Augustus turned to be an emperor who really like wanted to champion a religious revival in a way. So a lot of what he did, he rebuilt monuments. He and by him rebuilding monuments, when you really think about it, he's kind of solidifying himself as a part of these sacred places. Rome very much thought that like the city itself was built on, like good omens, good augurs, good auspices, and so they wanted to keep that going. Him solidifying himself in all of these religious monuments. It was like, yeah, not only am I divine lineage like Julius before me, who claims that he comes from Aeneas's stock and Aeneas is Venus's son, so like we're super awesome, but like I've held every single religious office. I made it so that all of the people that hold these religious offices after me are going to be either part of the royal family or one of my heirs. And like he just essentially took control. And he took control so slowly that it wasn't like with Caesar where everybody had their red flags, like waving in the wind, like, we should be watching out for Caesar. He's getting too much power here. The way Augustus was able to rise to power was a little bit different, and he didn't have as many enemies. Okay, so some other notes that I took. Let's see. I like to think of him trying to do this religious revival through Rome. It's his make Rome great again kind of strategy. And that's really the biggest comparison. Let's see. The Romans did pride themselves on not only how pious they were, but cleaning up Greek myths. And I think this is also part of his religious revival thing because he was relying on the Greek myths as part of his own lineage. But they thought they were like the true and proper Greeks for removing all of the degenerate parts, like some of the adultery, some of the like really underhanded shit. They're like, no, we're the real ones because we're like actually treating these gods good.
It just, I'm laughing because it reminds me so much of Christians.
Yeah.
Like how in, I forget the Bible that everybody has that was printed in like the 1940s that added the stuff about how gay people are evil, and that wasn't in the Bible really until then.
I think that's King James, the one because
Yeah,
that's the one I see the most dogmatic people using the
and
most.
that they distributed that Bible everywhere, so it would be the only version that people would see anymore, and it's like the more indoctrinated version of it. That's just what I just keep thinking of that is just the same thing happening again. And it's like wild just to see how it happens, and that some of the people that are like quote unquote like spreading the word, I guess, about these stories, they don't even know what they're doing. And it's like shocking to me. Like I said this to you earlier, but it genuinely shocks me when people just go around saying things and they don't know if what they're saying is true, because I'm always so afraid that I'm said something wrong. Like I will be absolutely sure that I am right about something, and then 5 minutes later I will be like, but am I actually right about that? And I will go and like relook it up again just to be sure that I am remembering that right. And so it's like shocking to me that there are people that have been like running around saying this stuff about like Ovid's myths versus the other ones, as if Ovid's is worse or less than or whatever, purely just because he wrote it because, oh, he was just mad at this emperor. And they never once thought like, what did the emperor do to make him so mad? Because look at like the stories that he changed. Like one of the stories that he changed was making somebody a rape survivor. Like, do you really think that somebody who is just a horrible person would choose that out of everything to change? Is that like that's what he changes?
If we want to call, or if we're going to call this strictly political commentary, like taking somebody who's saying, I have the right to be supreme ruler of everything, to be in charge of all religious ceremonies, games, festivals, all of that somehow by having every single office or putting somebody I know in every single office. You're it's just like, how do they not see it? Like this guy totally ingrained himself in religion, in government, in ways that we're seeing somebody else do that's very, very scary. Mm-hmm. And Ovid was like, okay, you're doing this and you're saying your reason for doing this is because you have this divine lineage, because you are descended from Venus and Mars, and people think you're like Romulus, our founder. So I'm going to call out those people for exactly what they were. You want to be the Jupiter of Rome? Look at what Zeus did in all of these myths. I'm going to write about every single one. And that's essentially what he did. And so I tend to not think of the Metamorphoses as strictly political commentary, though, because I do think Ovid appreciates these myths as like it's a secondary thing. Of course, he has his motivation, like that's very clear. But at the same time, all of the most educated people went to Greece to study. Like they knew the Greek versions. they also like had their own moral compass that they did put into it, yes. But Ovid's moral compass here is calling out the gods on their bullshit. He wrote a whole set of letters that are supposed to be from women of Greek mythology, calling out heroes on their bullshit. Like I haven't read all of them yet. I read the one Ariadne to Theseus today, and I think Dionysus of Percy Jackson would be very proud because it starts off just like I was so sad and scared when you left, and I looked everywhere for you, and I was really shocked to find that I couldn't find a single ship around. But then I got mad. And like, what is gonna happen to me now, you fucking dick? Like, it's just like exactly what we talk about. So it's hard to be mad that he rewrote or that he took creative liberties sometimes because of these things. Now, the part where I know we're going to have a little bit more trouble with Ovid, and this is why I do want to do more research on him as an author, is the Ars Armatoria, the Art of Love. This is the supposedly the book, the poem that got him exiled. And the reason it got him exiled is because you have Augustus doing this, like, we are Romans, we are moral, we are strong, we are pious. And then you have Ovid joking around about picking up married women at public monuments, you know? And so it's like, yeah, of course he's going to be mad and he's going to be like, you want people to do this impious behavior at these sacred places I just rebuilt? What the hell?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that it's fascinating how I was just saying this to a friend of mine that because she was like, why do people get so upset about these like certain myths? Like, why do they feel the need to like tell people that they're not allowed to like the new Medusa myth or the Hades and Persephone myth where Hades isn't an abusive person to her? And I'm like, because, and I told her like, because people like it. Because a bunch of Greek mythology retellings, books mainly, have become popular over the last however many years, and the majority of the books that people really there are other ones like about I don't want to say her name wrong, the wife of Agamemnon. Yeah, there's books of from her perspective. There's books about the women of Troy in general, but a lot of like feminist like retellings of Greek myths have become popular to do in the last 10 or whatever years. A lot of the most popular books in that genre are about Medusa, the newer Medusa myth, and the newer Hades and Persephone retelling where they have some sort of a romantic situation that isn't just horrible abuse all the time. And the reason why they're upset about it is because they can't control how people talk about them anymore. That's literally why. Like there's this like think piece, whatever you want to call it, on YouTube that I saw when it was first posted like 9 months ago, and it's the bane of my existence because it's one of the like the Greek mythology sort of think piece whatever videos that has the most views. Like when I saw it like 9 months ago, it had like 200,000 views, and now it has almost 1 million. And it's called like The Problem with Greek Mythology Retellings, and it's literally an hour long of this British woman saying that the thing that is wrong with retellings is that they're feminist, and that some of the stories change the myth so much that they're not like the myths originally. And it's like that is literally not exaggerating. The entire fucking point. The entire point is that you're rewriting the myth into what you would like it to be instead of what it actually is. And so she goes on this, there's an entire part of this like thing where she's talking about how only people from Greece or people who know about Greek mythology well enough should be allowed to write about it. And I'm like, you're just trying to gatekeep these myths. You don't like it that the general populace has access to these stories now, and you can't control how people talk about them anymore. And that's exactly what was going on with Ovid, was they didn't like how he was retelling these stories in a way that people like better.
You know what? I'm going to call out something that we haven't called out yet, and it's going to rile some people up, I'm sure. Okay. You know how white people feel like they have no culture sometimes and they will grasp at straws for culture?
Mm-hmm.
We've talked a little bit, I know you and I have talked at least about how Wicca and witchcraft seems to be an offshoot of how some of those people tried to borrow culture.
Mm-hmm.
This is another one, it feels like. And for some reason, they feel like because Greek mythology is Western culture, that it is theirs. It's not. It's not yours. But it's interesting. I
Yeah.
just figured because when I really think about it, most of these people that have such huge problems are white people. Oh, you're changing this too much. Oh, I don't like this rewrite. I don't like this choice you're making.
Yep.
Um,
It,
Also, in terms of rewrites, we got criticized a lot for like, oh, you just want everything to be wrapped up in a happy ending and have your heroes actually be heroes and things like that. No, we love flawed characters. We very much love flawed characters, realistically flawed characters who want to do the right thing but stumble and do the wrong thing sometimes. People who were used to doing the wrong thing but want to change and do the right thing. All of those things can be very interestingly written. Not everything has to be trauma porn.
nope. You actually don't have to do that. And
Mhm.
like I was looking for a like trigger warning because I was curious about the different Greek mythology retelling stories because some of them are very aggressive with the stuff that they do and the way that they depict it that is just like too much. If you've ever had like anything like that in your past, it's like a minefield trying to figure out if you can read these books or not. And so there's a lot of them that I would like to read, but I just like don't read them because I just don't know if I can. But like the best example of it was like I found a trigger warning for Circe by Madeline Miller. It had like four things on it. And then I went to a different website just to like compare, and the other website had like 30 things on it. And I was like, what the fuck? How are you how are these two things the same for the same book? How are like if I saw the trigger warnings of the first book and the first version that only had four things, I would have gone like into reading that book and I would have like thought that I would be fine with it. And then only for like the other one to like those two things are so different that it's like how could you ever how are those two things from the same book and how are you supposed to tell and like I think Circe is a an adult like considered adult. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I at least know that Song of Achilles is considered a young adult book, and so which means that like young adults are going to read your book, and I'm like there's a lot of like heavy stuff in this book, and I'm not sure that like young adults, like actual young adults, like middle school and high school kids, because that's what I think of when I think of young adults, especially like high school age. But middle school, I read young adult books when I was in middle school. Most middle schoolers do, and I'm not sure that they would be able to handle the like intense scenes in these books and without like getting help from adults like helping them try to process that stuff. And so it's like when you see stuff like that, you're just like, what? Like, how is this like the same book, but it's described so differently by two different websites? And it's like, how are you supposed to tell what you can read and what you can't? It's impossible. And so what are you supposed to do, bro? Like when you're just wanting to like read them. That's why I like there's a lot of reasons why I like Percy Jackson, but like I think it's funny that people think that like, oh, you just like that book because it's a children's book series. And I'm like, no, I like that book because it like accurately depicts how messed up trauma and like abuse, especially as a child, makes you be and shows it in an accurate like depiction. The characters still make mistakes and they still hurt each other and they still don't make the right choice all the time, but they like find their way through it, except for Luke by the end. But still, like even with him, the way that he's depicted as a villain is a very like more accurate sort of villain instead of it being like over the top and out of this world and just like so villainous like you can't imagine how that person could even be real. Like he's a real like people have met so many people like the reason why there's like one of my favorite things in the world is seeing the like 5 or 6 different like content creators on Percy Jackson stuff on you on here that are just we're always talking. One of us is always talking shit about Luke. Like it never stops. There's always at least one of us that's making a video about Luke that's pissing somebody off, and so it's like it's so fun to see those videos. But the reason why we all are so passionate about it is because we've all met people like that before in our lives, and we know that people like that exist. And so when we see people defending them or defending him, we're like, this is becoming like kind of like a farce that he weaponizes the empathy people have for him to do horrible things, and now you guys are defending him and saying that we don't have empathy for him. And it's like, but that's literally that's the entire point of his character. But like the Percy Jackson series handles that well while showing their characters being complex without having to fall back on just like object trauma in like a gross way. Like there's every kind of trauma that besides like overt like sexual abuse, like there is still you can still like talk about the stuff that Luke does and know that it's like very much towing the line in a very dangerous way, the things that he is doing in those book series, but it's not as like overt about it as other series, but there's still the same general themes as like Song of Achilles and things like that. It's just shown differently for like an audience because honestly, to be honest about it, because it was made by a married couple who likely went through some shit in their life and decided to write a book series about their life to help other people not have as hard of a time as they did and as their kids did, with dealing with having disabilities and things like that. And so it comes from that sort of a place of like, we want to help people. And so if you want to help people, you're not going to be like, and then this person was raped 57 times by whoever. You're just not going to do that because you don't want other people who went through what you did to feel that way. You know how bad it feels. You don't want other people to feel like that. And so you write about it the way that you wish people would talk about you and what happened to you instead. And
Yeah. It's interesting that Madeline Miller can write PTSD well. She can write symptoms of PTSD well and is very empathetic when it comes to that. But when it comes to especially male sexual assault by coercion, it's just like nobody's pointing out how icky it is.
yeah, and it's just weird, just weird. Like we'll get into it a little bit later, but there's weird themes with men, with gay men and women, and just
Oh yeah,
it's just
something
weird. It's just weird. It's just weird. But the thing I wanted to talk about that I was like about to say was I wanted to talk about censorship stuff. Um, Jean, our mutual that I keep bringing up, Fangirl Jean is her name on here. She made a really good video talking about how a lot of the people who want to like ban books, and also there's this weird movement online on here of people wanting to like ban certain kinds of like fan fiction and things like that, and people trying to say that that's always a bad idea, like censoring things is never like the answer. And her video was essentially saying that a lot of people think to that you should like censor books with like topics or whatever or fan fiction or what have you that you think children shouldn't read because they're like the way that they look at it is like, well, it's up to the parents to like protect their children from like those bad people in the world. And so that's not really my business, but the part of the business I guess I can do is I can try to get these things banned, because that's something that I can do. And her point of the video was saying like, what if you just like try to be in community with like children? It's not that hard to do that. And if you do that, then you don't need to like ban these books because banning them doesn't actually do anything. And it just makes you feel like you're doing something when instead you could actually do something that would be much better if you would actually just like talk to children. And um I commented on the video, and afterwards she said that she was thinking of me when she like made it, which like thank you But like, and honestly, if the only thing that I can do on the internet is instead of people thinking of like a shadowy child that is going through incest, they instead think of me, then I'll be happy about that because I know that makes it more real to people. It's a lot more real if you actually have run into somebody who actually went through that before instead of just like hearing about it like tangentially through the internet or through news stories. It just doesn't feel as real when you like actually see a person like talking about that over time. Um, but the thing of that whole thing is like, yeah, it is it is so weird to me that people don't know how to talk to kids. And I don't have any kids. Like full I don't have any children. I will never have children. Like I'm 40, I'm definitely not going to have any kids now. Are you kidding me? But like even before that, I never wanted to have kids. I was like that 12-year-old walking around being like I never want to have kids. And so I never wanted to have any. And so this is coming from somebody who never wanted to have kids. I genuinely don't understand why people think that it's hard to talk to children. They're the easiest people in the entire world to speak to talk to.
Yeah.
They're the only people that you can talk to, and they will actually just tell you what they think. And
You
like,
know what's like so funny? It's the amount of people who are like, I don't like kids until they have their own. And then they're like, well, I like my kid. It's really not that different. It's just you came with an automatic emotional investment in one, you know? Um very much like having a conversation with a child can be quite interesting. Even at your niece's age, you know, where she's like not even talking. You could have a full on like nonverbal conversation about something with her and 100% understand what she likes, what she wants. You know, you and her have a relationship where you're her favorite person. Like, it's
yeah, I was gonna talk about that as like an example of like how easy it is to talk to kids because the whole thing, like when I was growing up, the reason why all the things that happened to me did happen the way that they did is because my mom didn't really have anybody else there to help her necessarily. Like my dad's family was nearby. Like one of my aunts lived literally 5 minutes from every house that we lived in, but they were my dad's family. And so he didn't like any of them because he was horrible and he would talk badly about them to my mom and to us. And so they weren't really around. And her mom, my nana, was around, but she lived 2 hours away. And so we used to see her still. She used to call us like every other day. And we would still see her every single month, which showed like how like dedicated she was to seeing us, that she lived 2 hours away and we would still see her every single month anyway. And we would either go up to her or she would just come down to see us no matter what until she died when I was 16. And so she was there, but she couldn't be there in the way that you would want necessarily because she lived 2 hours away. Like and like my I have a niece that's gonna be 2 in May, and my mom and me see her like at my sister's like every other weekend. Like for a couple months, we see them almost every weekend, and in one way or another. And it started off as like us inviting our like asking to see her, and now my sister will just be like, "Hey, we're home today. If you guys want to come over and see her on like a Saturday or a Sunday or whatever." And so now we see her all the time. We have built like relationships with her. We will continue to do that as she gets older. And so we're around. Like when my sister had like a doctor's appointment, my mom can watched her. When if she's sick and they don't want to miss work, my mom can watch her because she's retired and she wants to help, and that's the way that she can help, by watching her so they don't have to use all their sick time. And that's things that like my mom did not have when we were growing up. She was very much like on her own in that way.
I see gentle parenting as somebody who's at least aiming for that. I wouldn't say I'm perfect. And it's age appropriate expectations and treating your child like a human. You know, like those two things. And they go so far because the moment you acknowledge, oh, you are a tiny human and you have human needs, like automatically they get you earn their respect And it's because not a lot of adults have that, especially when it comes to older adults. Like boomers, Gen X still grew up with that attitude a little bit more than like some of us millennials and Gen Z as you go, like younger people having kids. Um, Really, just treating them like a person goes very, very far in getting them to actually listen to you and care. Yeah.
Yeah, the censorship stuff drives me insane because it's just people using what happened to me as an excuse to do things. And I'm like, the thing I always say is like, I never gave you permission to do that.
Yeah.
Like, why are you doing that? I know no child sex abuse victim was like, yes, ban books.
Mhm.
That's absolutely what would help me because the problem I had growing up was access to books. Yeah, that was my problem. That was the problem that I had was reading books. That's absolutely the issue that was happening in my life. Like, yeah, sure. And it's like I feel like I like literally have to like stop myself from being so blunt that I feel like it's just too much for people. But
Mhm.
it's just like, do you know, like, but I just like have to say this sort of thing. Like, do they know how absolutely like devoid from reality they sound like when I spent from age 6 to 18 being raped on and off by my father, and you guys are worried about a book I was reading? My dad was raping me, and he was making me keep it a secret from my mother. And like, and you think that the books I was reading is the problem? Like, that's what you think the problem is books? Or like media at all, that is what like made things worse? I'm
Mhm.
pretty sure it was my dad. And I'm also pretty sure, and the other part of this is that I never would have survived any of that without the books that I was reading.
Yeah.
I don't have like many memories, I think for obvious reasons, from especially the years before my parents got divorced when I was 12.
Mhm.
But one of the memories that I do have is I remember like the morning after stuff happened, and I woke up like really early in the morning because I used to do that. I used to wake up really early before anybody else would be awake, and that was like the only time where I could like sort of relax. and and I remember waking up really early, and there was a Roald Dahl book that I was reading. I think it was The Witches, I think, was the book that I was reading at that time. I was just going through all of his books because I liked his books because all the parents sucked.
Mhm.
So, of course, I'm going to like that sort of series. So, I was just reading all the books that he wrote from like my school library. And I just got up that morning and saw that book and started reading it. And then, as soon as everybody like woke up, I just like went back in my room and just kept reading that book. And like that's like what I did with like everything. Like that was around the time that I started really liking Star Wars
Mhm.
and things like that, or like The Lion King, other movies like that was out at the time. And like without going like being like too much about it, um when that kind of stuff is going on, you need to do something when it's happening so that you're not really there when it's happening because it's too hard. And that's what I would think about when that stuff was happening so that I wouldn't think about what was going on. I would be thinking about this other thing that I could like in this magical world that I could just think about instead.
Mhm.
And so it's like if I didn't have those books to read, um what was I going to think about? Like nothing. I would have to think about what was happening to me. And
Yeah.
I'm not the only kid. Every one of us does this. Like every single one of us does this. We just find things. We look for media that has people that remind us of our lives. And
Mhm.
then we like find those characters and then dedicate ourselves to those characters for the rest of our lives because of how much they mean to us. And so it's like that's why there's always trauma survivors in every single fandom, and we're usually the people that talk about whatever it is the most in every single one
Mhm.
because that's what we use it for. And so I don't mean to like be too upsetting to people, but like that is like the actual reality is that like when that kind of thing is going on in your reality, you need to go somewhere else. Because if you don't, you're not going to make it. Like, you're just not going to make it. And so it's like, that's the stuff that we have to do to focus on that is available to us so that we forget about that stuff. Like, kids now would probably be thinking about like Marvel stuff, like Marvel comics or DC comics or the Marvel movies or the Percy Jackson books, definitely, or like the series of unfortunate events books or the How to Train Your Dragon like series, things like that, with like a lot of books to read to keep like you having something to keep going so you don't run out of stuff to read. Like, I loved long books because they would take longer for me to read, to like keep my brain like focused on something else besides what was going on.
Well,
And
yeah, it's building these like rich universes that you can transport yourself to so you don't have to be in reality.
yeah, and then I would start writing fan fiction in my head all the time since I was little too, of a way to like get away from that. And yeah, that is like heavy dissociation, but that's what you have to do, and so that's what you're going to do. And so when the reality of when you try to like ban books or like censor books or even censor fan fiction, like I wish so much that I like knew about fan fiction earlier. Like, I remember reading it when I was like 12. Like, that was the first time I ever read it. And of course, I immediately found the kind of stories that I still like to read now. Like, Hurt Comfort fanfic is always the stuff that I read. I go through like phases where I read different like themes or different tags or whatever, depending on whatever I'm thinking about at the time. Like lately, I've been reading a lot of asexual like ones. So a lot of BBC Sherlock stories because those are the ones that have those themes in it that I like. But um, from the time when I was like 12, I was reading those sort of things. Everything was more separated on the internet then, and so it was a lot harder to find those stories. But those stories are just people having therapy. Like, whether you're reading it or you're writing it, that's what it's there for you to do.
Yeah.
And it's just like, even if somebody writes a fan fiction story and you don't like the themes, like there are stories that people write that I really don't like at all, or are super triggering to me or what have you. You just don't read them, especially with Archive of Our Own. It's so easy. Like, there is a section where they have an include section and an exclude section. And so if you don't want to read like you don't want certain tags to come up, you just put it in the exclude section and you never see them. And like, that's what I do with like certain tags. I just put them there and I never have to see those stories. And so you don't need to censor them. And like, the thing that is always scary is that if you start down the road of censoring something like which we see with Trump and Project 2025 right now, is that you can't stop it once you start it. And so even if there is like a certain kind of story that you wish wasn't on Archive of Our Own, the only kind that I'm okay with them censoring is the ones that are written by AI.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense at all, and that shouldn't be on there because it's not actually written by a person. It's written by a freaking robot. What is going on? Like, that's not even fan fiction. That's like, I don't even know what that is. It's something gross. But but like, if it's, as long as it's written by a human being, it's one of those things of like, there's always ways for people to describe things and make it fit the criteria they want it to in order to get it banned. Like, the Project 2025 list says that books with any sort of queer characters in them at all, even ones that aren't in relationships, is considered pornography and needs to be like locked up, and people who give it to children are distributing pornography because their definition of pornography is just books with anything that isn't straight people in it. And so like, if you say like, oh, stories with like incest shouldn't be posted on Archive of Our Own, it's like, okay, so where do you stop that about what sorts of sexual abuse can be discussed and which kind can't? Because once you start going down that road, you can't just like pull it back. People are going to find ways to describe things as sexual abuse. They're going to start saying that gay people having sex is sexual abuse and things like that. It's so easy to see how they would do that. And so that, combined with the fact that there's also people that are like trying to say that there's too much smut, and they're trying to market towards like asexual people, I'm like, can everyone stop like the things that I am and like just stop doing this? Because even if I think that there is too much smut because I get like triggered by it and I just get tired of everything being about sex somehow and I just want somebody to write something without me having to read sex in it and things like or like worried that that's going to like show up in some way shape or form. Like I know that I don't want them to censor it. I don't want them to like get rid like they're going after like romance books and want to like get rid of them from the stores because they think that their like smut is like too dangerous and I'm just like that's not what I want. I just want more options and I wish that like some of the books that I really like would be more popular on
I
like
want to say, like, people's villainization of smut, and this goes back even before this era, because I know you know the other time that it happened was like grocery store romance books,
mhm.
which had smut elements, but like for boomers, it wasn't like how millennials write smut, that's for sure. But at the same time, it was pretty close. It was their version. And people have always said the same things of, oh, these are disgusting, women shouldn't have these. It's policing women's sexuality, number one, and number two is it's just blatant misogyny, and this has no inherent value because the only people that really like it are women.
Yeah, like nobody is telling men to like stop watching
Porn.
whatever the hell they watch like that.
Let's take down all the websites. Nobody's saying that.
No. And even so, even if they did, they would also be wrong for saying that. But they go for like romance books. Like, have you ever watched anime? Like, I don't see anybody out there being like all of the shonen anime that has exploitative scenes where they just show off a woman's body for no reason, which is basically all of them except for Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, because that was written by a woman, and so there is none of that in that anime, and I like can hear birds singing when I think about that anime in general, but especially for that reason, like their female characters are so well written, and there's no gratuitous shots ever in that entire thing. Um, but like that's one of the only one that's the only one that I've ever heard of that doesn't have anything like that. I'm sure there are other ones. I just haven't seen them. But nobody is like saying like we need to ban Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokemon and Dragon Ball Z. Like these children are being indoctrinated into like blah blah blah. No one's saying that about them, and so it's like, can we? You don't actually care about that. You just don't like the fact that women are enjoying something that has nothing to do with you. And it's like the over sexualization of like everything. Like even if I don't like smut books and I think that they're a waste of time, it doesn't mean that other people don't can't like enjoy them for what they are. There are asexual people that read books like that and find it fun. There are asexual people that write books like that and they think that it's fun because they're not like repulsed by sex in that way. Or if they are repulsed by sex in that way, they aren't repulsed when they're writing it for themselves and like figuring out a way to write it in an interesting way instead of it being like something that they're just like taking in as like media or something like that. And so like it's never that black and white with that kind of thing anyway. And it's just it's scary because everyone involved with Project 2025 is basically in Washington right now. And the next thing with Trump that he hasn't done yet that he will do very soon is the Department of Education. And he's going to start doing this stuff. Like he's going to try to ban everything. And it's like concerning that especially like some Gen Z kids are like okay with the idea of banning anything ever. And it's like it's never a good idea to ban anything.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it is horrible and nobody should like it, there are ways like the best example for that I can think of ways to like get rid of something without just banning it in that way of like opening that idea up in a scary way is that the Disney movie Song of the South.
Mm-hmm.
It was what the Splash Mountain ride was based off of, and it is a like flagrantly like disgustingly racist movie. I've obviously never seen it, but they put it out at some point, and it was so horribly racist that even Disney in like the '90s in the 80s knew how bad this movie was, and they like took it all off the shelves.
Mhm.
They refused to ever like remake it or resell it at all ever, even back then. Like I remember in like the early 2000s going to like a state fair and seeing it there, and my friend there explaining to me why this random Disney movie was on sale for like $100 because there are no copies of it on sale anymore. They just stopped distributing it, and they don't ever put it on any platforms that they ever have. They finally like redid the Splash Mountain ride and made it like Tiana themed, so they got rid of that last part of it, but they just like stopped making it, and so people couldn't watch it anywhere, and so people just forgot about it. They didn't have to like make this whole big thing of banning it completely because they just stopped giving you access to this movie because it was super racist, and
Mhm.
that's all they had to do. You don't need, and that's it. That's all you really have to do with that. Like we talk about like Harry Potter. Like if people stopped buying Harry Potter related merchandise, it would eventually go away
Yeah,
because nobody would buy it anymore. Nobody would want to spend money on making it because they wouldn't make any money back doing it. And
exactly.
it's like that sort of thing. That's all you have to do. Banning J.K. Rowling books won't do anything because banning the book isn't like the problem necessarily exactly. It's much bigger than that when it comes to her and her ideas. Um, and I just hope that people keep that in mind because it's just never the right thing to start censoring stuff, especially when you see how much they're twisting things around right now. Don't
Mhm.
give them ideas.
Yeah.
Just don't. Like, I can guarantee you that there were, I mean, when I was growing up in the 90s, there was in that stupid Flowers in the Attic book series that I
Oh
hate
yeah.
and will always hate. I didn't tell people partly about what was happening at school because people at my school were reading that book and they would talk about how disgusting it was when you are going through that. And so I
Mhm.
just was like, well, I am disgusting. And they obviously know that. And I don't want them to know that about me. So I'm just not going to tell them anything. Like, I can remember thinking that when I was in seventh grade because of that stupid, horrible book series being out there. Yeah, I would love to burn those books because of what I feel like they did to me. But I don't think that they should be censored off the planet. I just think that people should have that idea in mind and maybe ask like actual survivors of that what they think about that series before they talk about it or make content about it or just spread it around more to like ask us how we feel about it sort of stuff. um but that's not me wanting to censor, it's just like asking the people that are affected the most by it how we feel about it
Mhm.
and then deciding what you want to do with it from there. That's a very different way of looking at that stuff than just get rid of it forever because I think it's bad. Because then it's like, then it turns into this whole weird thing of like what's good and what's bad. And it's like that's not what media is supposed to be. Like you're supposed to be talking about like the overall like story or narrative or like whatever they're trying to say.
Mhm.
That's the whole point. It's not about whether it's good or bad. It's like what are they trying to say? What is the idea that they have? Was it executed well? What point are they trying to make? And so now it instead it's like this movie is bad because I don't like this one thing about it and that just makes the whole movie bad, and it's like but I don't know what that even means because like I don't know like what do they what I don't care. I don't care about this one thing you don't like because I don't know what the overall movie is even talking about at this point. Like I need to know more than just I don't like it because they changed this one detail from the Marvel comics. And I'm like that doesn't mean anything. What are they actually trying to say? They don't know that. They don't know that anymore. Because it's just turned into like it's good or it's bad. And I'm like, okay, well, that's fun.
Yeah. Um. But yeah, and I mean, have we heard anything else on the censorship front with 2025? Like, I feel like I'm hearing more of the medical stuff right now of people more just saying like, "Oh, I did have a sterilization scheduled for myself and I had it all approved and everything and now the doctor's scared to do it." I'm not saying so much of like, "Oh, my library's pulling this." Feels like people are focused on the bigger issues, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's purely because they haven't started completely doing things yet with the Department of Education. Like they're going to very soon. Um, they've like started talking about that kind of stuff, but I think that Trump and everyone involved with him knows that going after the Department of Education or just education is going to be a nuclear bomb going off. Like when it comes to people's reactions to what they're doing, like people will lose it if like with you messing with like kids schooling and just access to things like that. It's very hard for people to be like, oh well, they're not that bad when they're like banning like all these books and calling them pornography. Like that's it's such an extreme thing. Besides like the other things they want to do with school and just taking out all these different programs and stuff. And so I will say that the discussion about Medicaid right now is like setting up for that
Hmm.
because there's a lot of people I talk to people who have Medicaid as part of my job, and people do not know how many programs are like funded by Medicaid. They have no idea how many are funded by Medicaid, and a good amount of them have things to do with like taking helping kids and
Hmm.
just kids having access to things like a lot. Not only like the Head Start program, which helps kids go to like get into preschools and things like that, or have like their daycare paid for if you're low income. There's so many like nonprofits and out there that contribute towards children, like just giving them like free books or clothes or just like after school programs you would go to when you were growing up that I went to forever and things like that. Most of those things get funding through Medicaid. And so them trying to take out Medicaid would also take a lot of that stuff out. And that just sets up like people having less places to go and being forced to go to like private institutions, which would be church. And so like that's what they're trying to do is to try to force kids to have to go to like a church in order to be like helped because they can't go to daycare or the other programs anymore because they don't exist anymore. And then if they go to a church, then they would try to indoctrinate them into the church and then they would slowly take away the other books because they wouldn't have access to them anyway and they would try to get them to read the books that they like instead. And it's like disgusting how easy it is for me to see the steps of them doing this because of who my dad was, but like that's how people do this kind of thing. They take away the things around you that give you support so you don't have anything left but the one thing that you have to go to because you have nothing else. And then they use that thing to slowly try to manipulate and gaslight you into being exposed to things that you normally never do. And they start taking things away from you and you don't even realize that they're doing it until it's already happened. And then you're sitting there like, what am I doing? Like, what happened? Like, where did this go? Like, how do I get it back? And that's basically what they're trying to do with everything right now, with everything. And
Everything.
it's not really working because people are very honestly like fight or flight. Like everyone's having PTSD every single day with how we're like reacting to everything. But it's like you have to react to everything they do because you never know when they're actually going to do something because they if they could do something they would do everything. Like nothing that you hear about Trump doing is out of line or out of the picture. If he would be allowed to do it, he would do it no matter how insane it sounds. Like they cut all these people from the FAA and planes have just been like falling out of the sky for the last month. Like I was just telling my mom how glad I am that her and her boyfriend guy are not going on a trip where they're flying. They're going on like a road trip soon, and they're not going to fly for another couple months in the hopes that maybe by the time that trip will come up, maybe this won't be as bad. But
Hmm.
all these accidents are happening, and I just saw in the news that they're cutting more people from the FAA. Like they're just going to keep doing that. They don't care. They want to keep everybody afraid, and that's how they're going to do it. And so when it comes to like children, they're trying to take away a lot of the other programs around education so that when they go after education, they can just come in and do it without people being able to stop them as easily. And that's why they haven't done it yet. They know that they can't just go in and do that and then like take it back like they have with other things because it's children and education. It gets way too many people's attention when you mess with stuff like that in a way that it's harder to just like stop, to like, distract people from. And so they're trying to like set it up where when they do that, they can just go in and do it and not have to worry about people stopping them with like judges saying that everything that he's doing is illegal or whatever, like what they've done with everything else. Like judges are still saying that freezing Medicaid is unconstitutional every once in a while, every couple days, so that they don't do it again. Because like if you want to know if that was serious or not, like none of the Medicaid websites were working like the day that they did it, like in any state. And I talk to people every day that are like elderly and poor, and they would, I'm not exaggerating, they would die.
Yeah.
They would die without Medicaid. They would absolutely die. They wouldn't have a way to like pay for their prescriptions or go see the doctor or get food, pay their electric bill. Like the other day, I was talking to somebody who was crying on the phone with me, like thanking me for helping them, but they were crying on the phone with me because I called their electric company and got them to say that they wouldn't shut off their power before the bill that we were paying for them went through. And it's like if I didn't have that money from Medicaid, they wouldn't have anything there to stop that from happening. And they lived in Michigan, where it's cold. It's 5 degrees outside right now. And it's that cold I don't live in Michigan. I live next to Michigan, but it's just as cold in Michigan right now. And I don't know why the state of Michigan doesn't have the law that Wisconsin does, that you're not allowed to legally shut off power in the winter because it's too cold. Like you no matter how big your bill is here, between the months of December to March, they cannot shut your power off. It's illegal because it's too cold outside. And so it's like those people will die. Like people will not get into assisted living homes or nursing homes because Medicaid pays for that in the same way that they pay for kids to go to school.
Yeah.
Sometimes. And so it's like it's really scary to think about that stuff, but that's like what would happen if they took that stuff away. And I guess the only thing I can say to like kind of end that point is just I know that it's exhausting seeing all these stories constantly, and you kind of have to like pick and choose which ones you get like really upset about because it's impossible to be in that like state all the time. You just get too tired and burnt out and you just get too overwhelmed and you can't do it. But I guess the point, especially when it comes to like stuff with kids, is like never get to the point where you start thinking that like, oh, he's not going to do that because he would never go that far. Yes, he will.
Yeah.
Yes, he will. This man tried to overthrow the government. He tried to hang his vice president in front of the U.S. Capitol building, and he is now president again. Nothing will stop him, ever. Nothing. We will have to stop him to make him stop anything. Because he will, if you did something like that, and then were elected as president again anyway, why wouldn't you do everything possible? Because you obviously feel like nothing will ever bad will ever happen to you.
Yeah.
Because you did that and you got away with it. And so, like, no matter what scary things you hear about children, particularly, just I feel like this is like my own thing, but I just have to say it. Like, maybe keep some of like the anger and rage you have for children specifically because they can't do anything.
Yeah, they're the most hopeless right now. Or helpless. Yeah, hopeless and helpless, honestly.
They have to go to school because if they don't, they're going to get in trouble, and their parents will get in trouble. They have to go to school. They have to do these things. They don't have any way to like, help themselves because they're too young. And so if a lot of these things that are happening to them will affect them the most because they don't have any way of like trying to, assert themselves in the ways that like adults can. Like as horrific as it is to like lose Medicaid for elderly people, they do have like adult family members or churches or places like that that could help them. And with kids with having to go to school, it's like it's literally against the law if your children doesn't go to school. Like,
Hmm.
so it's like if school becomes too dangerous for them, they can't just like not go anymore.
Yeah.
Like if they would, their parent would have to like stop doing their job, so they would homeschool them, and that's not something that most people can do,
Hmm.
especially when eggs are like $27 like a dozen or whatever it is right now. I'm like honestly terrified to even look. But I saw like posts about that, about how much they were, that they're either that much money or stores don't have them.
Hmm.
It's either one or the other. And so I'm like, okay. Um, but I guess just like try to keep them in mind, because as upset as they are, which they are, they're people, they have opinions about everything that's happening to them. Maybe ask them about what they think is happening, like around them, and about their opinion about things, because I know they have opinions about things because they're people,
Yeah.
they're human. And maybe ask them about what they want or like what they think about these things before you decide to like run in and rescue them from like a big bad scary man that you don't even know is actually even there, instead of the people that actually are there. Like, just maybe think about that. Like, the
Maybe.
amount of times people want to save children from things that are not hurting them drives me insane. I'm just like, why? Why? Like, why? Out of everything to want to do, you want to like ban their books. Sure, go for it, I guess.
Anyways, so let's dive into Song of Achilles because yeah. These chapters were definitely interesting. Okay, so when where we left off, I didn't know how she was going to continue on from this point just yet because things go so far. Like, we don't have a lot of the early days of what being on the shores of Troy was like. You know, we have they got stuck on Aulis, they landed on Troy. There's one dude who got killed first that actually is mentioned in these chapters, but it's different than what I'm used to. So we'll talk about that in a bit. And then they set up camp. I think there was an early parlay. We haven't gotten to it, at least in the storyline. It's mentioned that Menelaus wants one, though. But yeah, so let's see. Where we left off, the winds showed back up at Alos magically after Iphigenia was killed, and they set off. And Achilles still feeling very, very conflicted because he was told, "I'm going to marry this princess," and then she was killed right in front of his face. Yeah. So this is why I said right away that like Madeline Miller writes PTSD okay, but she doesn't write some of the other things okay, is because one of the first interactions in chapter 19 is Patroclus and Achilles, and they are sitting on their boat on the way to Troy, and all of a sudden Achilles randomly asks, "What was it like when that boy died?" And so Patroclus is like, he's thinking about it. He's trying to like conjure the image in his head, and he even says, even trying to think about this to tell Achilles was making him nauseous. Um, and Achilles is asking questions like, "Did he twitch like when animals die? Like my dad told me to think of the people that I kill as like animals." And it's interesting because what we're getting here is very much this conversation that happened at the end of the last chapter between Odysseus and Patroclus of, "Hey, Achilles appears to be really soft. You need to make him not soft."
And he's like, no, I don't want to.
Yeah, he's like, he's my Achilles though.
That part I thought was like, I don't even know how to describe this, but it's just like ever since I noticed that she just like doesn't let him do anything, really, either one of them do anything that's too like gray or possibly not the right moral choice. I'm just like, why is this all so weirdly boring? Like, this is a story about war. What is going on?
Yeah,
But
that part of it is so people love this book for the romance, and the romance is pretty interestingly written. But the war itself doesn't always make sense, and that's what you could tell. Like this was written from a female lens, 100%.
It's also just like, I don't know. It's we'll talk about it with like the other later chapters, but it's just weird about how they like talk about certain things. I'm just like, this is so it just it feels so like overly moralistic that it makes me feel like be very aware that it's fake because
Yes,
people would not.
nobody would think this way. Yeah,
No, nobody would make these decisions in this way, especially with like the social norms that were set up in this world. It's confusing that they talk about that earlier in the book and then have it happen. That's just not how people's brains work in that sort of a way. You don't get told that this is just how things work and then do the polar opposite, without there being like cognitive dissonance and things like that in between. But this like thing with like Achilles was like a good example of that, I suppose, which of how he's upset because he thinks that he could have like saved her or done something to help her or something like that, and is like upset about the fact that he, um, had to watch her die, which is very understandable. But then at the same time, when Patroclus tells him like, "Oh, there was no way that you could have saved saved her," he just like kind of gets over it after being like a broody little bitch for a little bit longer. And I'm just like, that's not how this works. Like, you don't just sit there and act like an emo child for a couple days and then just like get over it. Like, it's like PTSD. You have intrusive thoughts and like memories and things like that about that. And they don't just like disappear from your brain once you like just stop thinking about it because something else happens. And so it was just interesting how Achilles was like upset, but it was like the way that they described it was almost like downplaying like how upset he probably actually was by more talking about it as like a problem. And especially because Patroclus has all of this pressure on him because he knows the whole thing that he knows he's going to die. And so it's like he has, I feel like if that puts so much pressure on his character to like fix things because he's like, I don't want to waste any time with him because I don't know how long like I'll have with him. And I
yeah,
think that's just really hard because it means you can't really focus on anything that's really happening. Because you're constantly you're not like in the present, to use like therapy words, you're not like in the present moment. You're like always thinking about the future, which means you're not really here in the now and like being able to like live through the here and now without actually being like somewhere else. And that's just how the story is like set up, but it's just really hard to know that sort of a thing about somebody and just have to like have that in your head all the time and
yeah,
be like, trying to help them, but at the same time you're like every time you help them, you know that you're like getting closer to them dying. So it's like, why am I helping them? Like sort of a feeling of like I don't want them to die, but I also don't want them to be unhappy either. It's just like there's just no like way to like navigate that well. I guess it's hard.
yeah. So, Patroclus, when they're having this conversation, he goes with the practical answer, which I thought was interesting, not the like, oh, but your glory, the glory you're oh so wanting. He says, it won't always be like that, like watching Iphigenia, who was unsuspecting and totally afraid. He says, these will be men that you fight, warriors who want to kill you if you do not strike first. So the practical answer, okay, but if you don't strike them, they'll strike you. And like, because of course, that's all Patroclus can muster. He's not a fighter himself. He's like, okay, well, you do this so you don't die.
Hmm. And I even think that's like weird in this story that Patroclus is so the opposite of everyone else that even in the middle of a giant war, he like doesn't want to fight or like defend himself or isn't involved. It just feels like him being like the like point of view character that everyone knows what happens to him at the end. So you're like you're supposed to like fall in love with him too. That like they go out of their way to make sure that he doesn't do anything that is close to being like morally questionable either, and it's just like annoying to me because it's like just because he's traumatized by this stuff when he was younger doesn't mean that he's just gonna like take it like or like not want to like help or anything like that. It's like just because you have lots of trauma doesn't mean that you don't get mad and want to beat some people up. Like that would be fun to have been able to do when I was younger. To have like a reason to punch someone in the face, I definitely would have done it if somebody would have let me, and I wouldn't have been terrified of what would happen to me if I did. Um, but it's just that kind of a thing of can you just like let him be like a person? Like it's hard for me to sometimes when I'm reading this story I have a hard time figuring out like his characterization
Mhm.
because I kind of feel like it's more just like he's like the audience stand-in for Achilles, and it's hard for me to like feel like I know who he is sometimes, because so much of his character is about Achilles, and I understand that that's like the story, but it's just hard because you don't get to know as much about him without him immediately thinking about something to do with Achilles. And I just wish that we could spend like a little bit of time with him without that being like what he's immediately thinking of. But that's never going to happen in this sort of a book.
Yeah. Yeah, it is hard. It's like his whole existence only revolves around him, and it becomes very not interesting. I mean, we do get a little bit of his separation from him coming up, but let's see. So this all happens while they're still on the ship. As they're on the ship, Achilles is like mindlessly throwing a spear up and down. They say that it's everybody's so bored on these ships that like the oarsmen are even starting to beat the oars to this
Yeah.
rhythm that he's throwing the spear up and down. Um, but then they get to the point where they can finally see the Trojan shores. And the first sight that they see is Hector. And Hector is my literary crush. He's like the only literary dude I've ever had a crush on, to be honest. And for me, it's very much about how much of a family man he is. But what I love about this is they set it up like, we had Odysseus saying, "You guys will be back in like a month. Don't worry about it. It's not going to take that long." And people like constantly underestimating. So with Hector coming out, here's what it says. This was no slouchy prince of wine halls and debauchery, as Easterners were said to be. This was a man who moved like the gods were watching. Every gesture he made was upright and correct. There was no one else who could be but Hector. And the other thing that it says about like their forces, they see someone come out with a bow and arrow as soon as they're within arrow's range. And Philoctetes' bow is definitely the most famous on this campaign because it used to be Hercules's. And so they say that this archer had a bow. It wasn't quite as big as Philoctetes, but it was close. It was so close. And so for them, it's like, okay, we could still take these guys, but like we weren't expecting that. It's interesting, even Patroclus, who's not a fighter, is saying this.
hmm And I remember the line where they said that they thought they would take them by surprise, and then they were there already. So obviously, they weren't able to do like the stuff that they want. And I'm just like waiting for them to like realize, like, yeah, about this war being so easy, and about you just like going home and becoming really rich.
Yeah.
Like, are you sure about that?
Seriously, it's not gonna happen like that. And even if it did, like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, yeah, so they right away see it's not easy, but Achilles, who's been mindlessly throwing this spear, as soon as he sees that first archer line up his shot, he decides, I'm going to throw the spear, thinking it's not going to even make it because spears don't go that far. Spear is heavy and it's way heavier than an arrow. An arrow also has the force of the actual like bow behind it. So you're working against physics there. So somehow he makes this miraculous shot from way too far away with his spear onto the shore. It nails the guy directly in the chest. And then he nails another guy. And then as he's like talking, he just calmly picks up a random shield and is like, hold on a second, and like shield parries an arrow. Um, and I think that this might be what Jean was getting at with the ableism because it's giving fighting savant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very everything with him is like people like I was trying to say last time, they kind of like baby him in a weird way, and it's also just the way of like yeah, obviously like the first time he shows up to battle, he's literally never fought anyone ever in the history of his life. And he's 16 years old. Like, yeah, obviously he's just gonna like kill somebody from like thousands of meters away and just be great at it automatically. And it's just like that's not real. Like we're not that good at things in right away. And it also just kind of makes it the thing with Achilles in this story is that it's hard to see him like a real person because he's talked about in this way like he's kind of like Patroclus thinks that he's perfect. And then whenever he's discussed, you just like don't see him really doing anything. He like has like the perfect response to things all the time and it's just like no person is like that all the time. Um like you're not going to win every fight that you've ever been in even if the gods like had you on purpose because they wanted you to be like the best fighter. Even like the best fighters sometimes don't win. That's what makes the story better when they do win. You're supposed to lose sometimes so that you learn something out of like the fight that you lost. And so he doesn't have to learn anything because he never loses. And so it's just and especially during this part, there's like some line somewhere in here where it says that he decided to like throw it at them because he was like worried or something like that that they were going to do something to like Patroclus and I was just like oh Jesus Christ like I just can't even handle this that literally everything is about like because it's like it's not that this guy who is literally like bred his entire life to be a soldier and a warrior would like want to fight people on his own. It has to be that he's only doing it to protect his boyfriend that nobody else knows is his boyfriend. I'm just like can he just be a person? Like, is that allowed?
Yeah, so we have very much this like it feels like Thetis is still pulling the strings here. It feels like she's helping him line up his shots and stuff. I definitely got the sense it was her because of we've seen I mean, she likes to make him look like a good little leader anyway. So giving him the first kill automatically is a good way to do that. But yeah, so that little savant moment was definitely for me. It's just like I'm not loving the benevolent autism thing we're getting from Achilles in this book.
No, it's like I autism. It doesn't make you. I don't even know what to say when people think that we're all like savants. Like, have you actually met an autistic person before?
Also, yeah, like isn't bad proprioception like more common? It's like I'm sure there are savants who do have physical skills, but I'm just imagining like yeah, you could probably be good at fighting, but you'd also be like tripping over your armor and shit because you have no proprioception.
And you just like be bad at it. Like you wouldn't notice because we just don't notice these things because I don't know if you've heard this, but autism is a disability, which means that there sometimes are things that you cannot do the way that other people do, no matter what you think. There's no like magical thing that will make you not disabled when you are autistic. Like, I know one of the biggest autistic creators on TikTok will bring this up when people try to act like if we just got accommodations we wouldn't be disabled anymore and she's like I get overstimulated by the wind and like yeah I've had that actually happen before like and like I get overstimulated by the sun. Is there going to be a world without any light in it? Like no. I once looked right at my ring light when I turned it on and it gave me a migraine for the rest of the day. Like I get overstimulated by like bright lights or like sounds and they're not things that you can just like stop. They're just like things that are naturally happening or occurring in the world.
Well, and think of how fucking loud an ancient battlefield.
Loud.
You
Like
have iron on iron. You have people crying. You have people
you're
screaming.
and like you're stuck on like a ship all day and you can't go anywhere or leave or do anything on your own. You can't get away from everybody. You have to
All of
be
this stuff is sensory nightmare.
Yeah, and he has to be like pretending all the time. That would be exhausting. He has to be like pretend he's like basically masking all the time. But he's not like showing any of the effects of how that would actually make him feel necessarily. And because that stuff is really exhausting when you have to do that. You get exhausted where you just have like when I worked at a job where I had to like leave my house to go do it on the weekends, I would literally just like lay there for 2 days and not do anything because I would be so tired. At the time I didn't know that. Granted, I wasn't really sleeping either, but the autistic like overwhelmed stuff was a big part of that too. Because I would get just so overstimulated by having to be around people all the time and having to like talk and act like I was a normal person that when I would go home from work, I would just like lay there and not move because I would be like so tired from having to do that all the time. And he's just like not doing any of that stuff. And then there's also just the normal stuff of like you said, like interoception stuff or just not noticing things, not noticing when you're like hungry or thirsty or when your body hurts. Like you just don't notice that stuff. Like I wake up every morning and I'm like, why am I awake? And then like a half hour later, I'm like, oh, I have to pee. And like some mornings, I literally just make myself get out of bed to go pee, even though I feel like I don't have to, because that's how interoception stuff works, where you don't notice the cues that your body is giving you until it's like progressed to a point where it's so obvious that you can't not notice it. um, but it's like that kind of stuff. And he just doesn't like people like him. You're autistic and people like you.
Yeah.
Even if they think that you're like their savior, they like you. They don't find you off-putting or weird. They think that you're cool. Like, well, what world is this?
Yeah. So the final kind of thing that happens in this first chapter that we read for today is the first person to go off the ships. Now, this part is changed from like the actual Greek myth, and I can't remember if this was in the Iliad or where this came up, but there was an omen that their seer Calchas had said that like, oh, the first person who steps foot on the shores of Troy is going to be the first to die. Mm-hmm. And nobody wanted to jump off of those boats. You know, they were like, I'm not going to be first. No, no fucking way. So they beached the ships and nobody's jumping off. And of course, Odysseus has to be the one to come up with an idea. And so he's like, okay, it's the first one to jump on the shore. So he throws down his shield and then he jumps down onto the shield. But he, like, of course, dropped the shield down when no one was noticing. So they're all like, oh, look, he went off the ship. He's fine. Let's all go. Protestalius is the same dude that they're saying here. He jumped off the ship and went into the water and then got attacked by Hector. Similarly, he jumped off the ship onto the actual shore in the mythology, and Hector just spears him. So, same thing. It's like auto kill first person that left for some reason. It's one of those stories that's interesting. It's like, it's so precise of we have to say exactly who the first person to die was.
Yeah, like that is such a weird thing. Who cares? But it's also just like that's just one of those things that like in old myths they would want you to know exactly who the first person is who dies, but we don't know any of the other people for all those years that die after that as much as the first person.
Yes. Yeah, there's like a whole 10 years we don't know, but this one still goes on. So we're still at the early days of Troy in the next chapter. And what they decide is that, like, first they draw out their places of where they're going to stay. And apparently Odysseus was the one who came up with the map of what the what the Greek camp on Trojan shores looked like. He delegates the spot all the way at the very end of the shore to the Pythians, to Achilles and his men. And so they go all the way out to the end of the shore. We do hear a little bit about other people. So we hear Achilles walks up on someone who he knows is a cousin, and it's this really, really strong dude. And then he says, son of Telamon, and that's when you find out it's Ajax the Greater. I've brought up this story before in our telling of this. The whole, so when Achilles' armor gets remade after Patroclus dies, the one that was made by Hephaestus, Thetis holds a contest at Achilles' funeral for who's going to get that afterwards. And it's decided that Odysseus is going to get it because the Trojans were most afraid of him. So he was greatest of the Greeks afterwards. Like, he was the one who was actually named that. But we have Patroclus himself here saying, I pitied Ajax a little. He would be Aristeos Achaeon if Achilles was not. So he's saying here it would be the strongest fighter, not the smartest dude. So yeah, that was interesting to me. Is like the other person who has stake in Achilles and who he is would have given the other person his armor. I mean, I don't think Thetis actually cared. She just kind of was like, you guys decide amongst yourself. Here you go. Good. These early days, as they're kind of talking things out, they decide they're going to wait for a parlay, number one. And number two, as they're waiting for further, like things to happen, they're going to go on some raids. And the raids are partially so they can look big and bad to the Trojans and like, look at all this power. We're gonna attack the land and resources around you until you have to pay attention to us. So on one of these early raids, they bring back a girl, and this girl, it was just like, it said that she's very beautiful. They don't really give us an age. And I'm kind of skipping ahead to the next chapter here, but Agamemnon used to give himself first pick. When this girl was put on their little, like, die? Is that how you say it? That they have all of the loot on, Achilles, like, or Patroclus whispers to Achilles, you need to ask for her. Ask for her. And he's doing it because he pities this girl. Like, we find out really quickly, he knows what's going to happen to her. He knows that some of these girls that are getting brought back from these now raids that they're doing are war brides. And he's not cool with it. And it very much becomes a, like, we're the good guys because we're gay. Like, in the last chapter we read for today. And I know you want to get to talking about that a little bit more because there's so much of that where it's just like, why are we doing this?
Yeah, like, the thing I said to you, I was just like, oh, brother. Like, oh, Jesus Christ. Like, when I was reading this part, I was just like, I feel like I just fell into an episode of, like, Sesame Street or something because it's like, this is a book about war. Usually you write things about war because you're trying to, like, test the human condition and, like, see what people can handle and how they respond to like difficult situations. Because for most people, the only way that you feel like you could ever experience things like that is by being in like a literal war. Mm-hmm. But this book is like, what if we have them be in war, but they never do anything wrong ever in the history of their life? What if we do that? And I'm like, this is so boring and also just weird. Like, first off, why it doesn't make sense, like, logically in any real way, like narrative wise, anything, that they would somehow not want to rape these girls. And I don't mean to say it like that, but that's like what it is. Like, these girls are being sex trafficked. That's what this is. But like the only kind of like exposure to girls that they have had is sex workers.
Yes.
Literally the only reason why they're there is to have sex with them when they were 13. And so, like, why include that earlier on in the story? And then when they're older, be like, oh, they're magically don't want to be interested in them because they're gay. And the entire time I was reading this entire section, I was like, do they know that, number one, when you are, like, preying on somebody who is in a weak position, you are not attracted to them. You're not like sexually like it's not like people rape people because they're sexually attracted to them. They like the idea of being able to have power and control over them. There is no attraction in any way. Like this is one of those things that drives me up the wall because of how people talk about like child abuse part of this particularly, but like the whole thing of how people even when they're trying to make jokes about how like um the people in the Catholic Church, like priests and things like that, that they're all secretly gay, and that the reason why they abuse boys is because they're secretly gay. No, they are abusing boys because they have access to them. They are not secretly gay. That is not why they're doing it. It's fucked up for people to even say that, and they don't even understand what they're even saying when they say it. But I'm like, that is why people think that gay people are predators, is because they think that predators are doing it because they're gay. They're not doing it because they're gay. They're doing it because they want to. And so, like, the idea that these two boys would grow up in this world that tells them that they should be raping girls when they're 13 and that it's not rape and that it's like their right and their duty to do it and that they shouldn't feel bad about it. And that somehow when they're 16 and they're in this position where they're already thinking less than of this girl, that they somehow are different from literally everyone else. And that they instead see her like a person and treat her nicely. And I'm like, it wouldn't matter that they were gay because that's the sexual attraction they feel towards each other wouldn't affect how they would feel about this other girl. It's not like Agamemnon is like sexually attracted to this girl. He just wants to dominate her.
Yeah.
And so the idea that like and also just the fact that like gay men can be predatory towards women. Like the fact that you're gay doesn't mean that you're like nice to women because just because you're gay and you don't have sexual that's not how no like when
This
what
what is it called? It's they call it benevolent racism when people do that about like racialized traits or stereotypes of races, where it's like, oh, Asians are super smart. You know, it's like, yes, you're saying that, but you're also still othering them. And so, yeah, I wrote huge eye roll at Madeline in my book at this part. So there is clearly a language barrier because they're attacking foreign people. You know, they don't speak Trojan, they don't speak Anatolian, all of these surrounding languages. So as Patroclus has this poor girl that they got and took back to their tent, he's trying to communicate with her like, let me cut off your bindings, I'm trying to free you. And she's freaking out because he's holding a knife and he doesn't know what to do, and then he just kisses Achilles thinking that's going to explain everything. And that wouldn't even explain anything back then. Like it would just be like, what are you doing, bro?
just be like I don't know what that's supposed to mean either.
Yeah.
It like the best like real world example I have of like just because you're gay doesn't mean that you're like not gonna treat women nicer. Like that is such like an archaic like way of thinking, but in general. But I remember one of my best friends was he still is a gay guy. I'm just not friends with him anymore. But so a lot of his friends were gay, and he would have these like big Halloween parties at his house every year, and me and my friends would go. And there was one year that I didn't go because the first time that I got shingles in 2017, I got it like the week of his party, and so I couldn't go. And one of my friends went and was like, I asked her to like watch our other friend because the other friend would get like drunk really fast sometimes at these sort of parties. And I was like her mother, where I would just like try to watch her when we would be at things like that to make sure that she was okay. And so if I wasn't there, I wanted somebody, and that friend was like, I'm going to watch her, so make sure that she's okay. And I was like, oh, thank God. And so the next morning, she calls me, and I'm like, so what happened at the party last night? And she's like, oh, that friend was drunk, and one of the guys that was friends there that is gay came up to her, and she was wearing like a Twister costume. And one of the dudes came up to her and was like talking about her costume and just like grabbed her boobs, like full on. And the other friend that was there, like pushed him off of her and was like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And he like, of course, because he's a gay guy who is like who is drunk, he started crying and was like, "I'm sorry." And it's like, "What the fuck are you doing touching her? You don't just touch her like that."
Yeah,
And
it
she was
doesn't
like,
matter if you're attracted to their bodies. You don't touch their bodies.
and
Yeah.
like she was so drunk that she didn't remember that happened the next day. And like she gave herself a black eye, like falling, like running into the wall at that party because she was so drunk. And like and she was like, it's scary to me that I didn't remember them doing that. And I'm like, it should scare you because another like our friend was there to like stop anything, but like just because they don't want to have sex with you doesn't mean they're not going to mess around with you, because sex in that is not the same thing. And it's like this is like an actual thing that happens with like some gay men hate women and they don't respect you, and they treat you like that because they don't care about you. And the idea that they're safe because they don't want to have sex with you is not necessarily true. And it's just there's this weird thing in this book that she writes them like, oh, they're gay, so like they're not going to fall into any of the misogynistic traps that anyone else does. And I'm like, they're still men. Like exactly. They're still men that have been like socialized in this world. Just because they want to like bone each other doesn't mean that they aren't like escaping like the male just being a man. And it's just like this weird, and I just was like, this is like so fucking ridiculous that like the original story of these girls was, you know, them being basically all of them are being trafficked. Obviously there is at least one part where Patroclus like thinks to himself about how they're killing farmers that have nothing to do with anything.
Yes.
And then basically makes himself feel guilty and shame for like acknowledging the realities of what's happening instead of thinking that Achilles is amazing for how good he is at murdering people, and then like stops thinking about it. But like that was at least nice for a couple seconds there to have like some complexity and stuff that immediately like ended. but like with these girls, it's like the original story is like these girls are definitely being trafficked by these men, and that's like what's happening to them. And the role that they have in this world, you wouldn't think otherwise that they would respond to them anyway but that, because that's the only role they've ever seen like girls and like women have in their world. They've never seen them any other way. And so it's just absurd that like they have them be like, oh, well, there's these stories in the myths about how Achilles has sex with like these other girls. But since I've decided to have him fall in love with Patroclus in this entire book, he can't.
And they're the only true pairing. Yeah.
He can't do that because that would make it bad. And obviously, bisexual people do not exist in this book.
Polyamorous people do not exist either.
Like bisexual, pansexual, like any sexual, but like gay and straight, nothing. No. Like he was even cross-dressing earlier in this book, and there was like nothing there. Like none of that exists in this world. There's only like you're either like a lesbian or you're gay or a gay man or you're just super straight.
I mean, that is somewhat true. You know, back then, any sort of effeminacy, and that's what they're getting at when they're saying why Achilles has to be like super masking of who he actually is. It's because any sort of thing that could be seen as effeminate, which having these like relationships past a certain age would be part of that. That makes you seen as more of a woman, and women are property. They're not people. Like, ew, gross. Why would you want to be a woman? Yeah.
It's just weird. Like when I remember when he picks the girl, that one of the other, I think it's like Odysseus or something, says to him like, "Oh, I didn't even think you liked women," and I was just like what? Like they would never say that. They would like never say that out loud to somebody who actually thought they were, especially at that time. But in general, why you wouldn't? You just wouldn't, and especially because that has nothing to do with that. Like why he would want her isn't because he thinks she's attractive. She's a terrified, like,
girl, yeah,
that doesn't even speak the same like you think they're gonna fall in love. But it was just this absurd thing that like it's just so over exaggerated of like these are the good people. These are the only good people everyone outside of this little box is a bad people. And so you don't like the bad people. You have to only like the really good people. And it was just, it's so simplistic that I'm like, why can't they be complex characters?
Yeah. So,
Why? Because it just like as they tell the story about are you literally having Achilles start a little school?
wait, let's get there. Let's get there. Okay, hold on. Yeah, so we have Patroclus saying things like, how old is he? Or how old is she? Like things that nobody would be thinking. He tries to start a conversation, and as soon as he actually does have her trust, he's able to like casually introduce himself, like, I'm Patroclus. She tells him her name's Briseis, so we find out, she's the one from the beginning of the Iliad. And he finds out, like, after that initial trust is built up, she actually did know a tiny bit of Greek, and it's because her father trained her for potentially having to become a war bride, which, like, sounds very realistic for the time, I'm sure, of like, look, these dudes are coming. I don't know if I can protect you. So here's just some things. And like, that's the best I could do. I could totally see a parent doing that. So Briseis knew the words mercy, yes, please, and what do you want? Everything else, her and Patroclus come up with their own like little makeshift, we're going to do hand gestures and like learn how to talk to each other until eventually they can talk to each other. And then we find out that Patroclus was getting Achilles to ask for every girl that was put up among the war prizes. And they slowly built up a tent of 8, 9, 10, 11 girls who weren't getting I mean, for lack of a better word, raped every night. That wasn't where the like screams were coming from their end of the campment, at least. No, these girls were sitting and learning Greek, and they were weaving and all of this stuff. And it's like, this is wartime, and all of these men are around, and you really think they would have left this tent of women that are already like considered slaves, prizes, all of that? They would have just left them alone because they're Achilles, or because you're Patroclus? No, people would see a tent full of women unattended and would take advantage of that.
And I still like go back to the fact that Achilles and Patroclus would not see them this way. They would not. Like, I'm sorry that you want the fact that they're gay to like supersede their entire socialization in this world, but they would not see women, these girls, this way. They might think that they're like feel bad for them because even they can tell that they're scared and things like that, but they wouldn't see them as humans because they don't see the other girls that they've met in their lives so far as human either. This is the only way that they've seen them as people that you're supposed to have sex with. And it's like a little storyline earlier on in the story that they're supposed to have sex with them, but they don't want to. But they know that that's the only reason why they're supposed to be around them. And so no matter how much you write about it, like they wouldn't feel this way about them. It doesn't make sense that they immediately, right away, just like somehow see the humanity in these girls when nobody else does. Odysseus is married. And these 16-year-old boys are more mature than Odysseus and these like full-on adults. Please, this is homophobic. Like, like this is homophobic. Like the way that we say that shit is homophobic because it's so just like ridiculous by how you're writing.
Homophobia. That's why I brought up benevolent racism. It's benevolent homophobia. It's like all these sweet little angel gabies would never hurt a woman, and it's like, okay, girly, I'm on board with you. Patroclus and Achilles are lovers. I'm on board with that. We're doing the most, and this really is, and it's what people say when they get mad at us of like, oh, you're putting modern morals onto stuff. Like, okay, no, they are. This one is, because why do they have to be so monogamous? Why do they have to be strictly homosexual? Like, yeah, and it's like wasn't even seen as a binary like that.
And also, like, can there be like balance? Like in Epic the Musical, it was like, I am so monogamous that I will murder everyone that I run into. everybody, including the god of the ocean while they're in the ocean. Because my monogamy is that strong that I can do that. And even though there's no reason why any of the suitors haven't raped my wife, they're not going to decide to rape her for 20 years until the day before I come home, and then I magically save her from it. Even though there's none of the storylines to protect her before he gets home. But it's still, they're somehow just through magic not going to do anything to her until that exact moment. And then in this version, they're so monogamous that they sound like an episode of Sesame Street. This is a war. This, like, it's war. Like, people have PTSD from war because they're being forced to do things that they normally would never do because they're in a difficult environment. Like, it would be way more interesting and actually, like, true to life if Patroclus and Achilles, like, Patroclus is included in this. He is actually a person outside of Achilles. People would be talking about them. They would be wondering what the fuck they're doing. They would be wondering why they never talk to anybody else, why they're always together, what are
Why
they
did
doing?
he never go out and fight when he took the
Yeah.
oath? Wasn't he that weird little kid that took the oath with us?
Yeah, like, didn't he murder somebody when he was a little kid, but now he's too afraid to fight? What's wrong with him? Like, they would have to do things to prove to the other people around them that they were, like, worthy people in this war so that the men around them wouldn't turn against them. Because that is, like, what it is. If this was written, like, more accurately, they wouldn't like Achilles for being autistic because people don't like us. And they don't know why they don't like us, but they don't like us. And so in this story, you have one person that's autistic, one super traumatized. They're gay together, which they're not supposed to do. And somehow nobody ever questions them about that. No one ever asks them any questions about what they're doing. Nobody ever, like, I was waiting this entire chapter for somebody to notice that they're just, like, hiding a gaggle of girls that apparently is invisible to the rest of the world and nobody else notices. I kept waiting for somebody to notice them and to challenge them and force them to do something, but it, like, never happened. And it's just like, that is the kind of stuff that would be natural to happen in this sort of environment. Like, just because you're Achilles, like, when you're at the top, everybody else wants to be at the top. And so they would be challenging him all the time, him specifically. And then by extension, they would be challenging Patroclus because everybody would know who had, like, eyes that, or was awake, that Patroclus is obviously somebody important to Achilles. They would constantly be challenging them to try to, like, move up the line of, like, like superiority or seniority in, like, this like social world that they have while waiting for this battle to happen. And, like, waiting for the war to actually start is the exact sort of time that people would start fighting and, like, trying to prove that they're better than other people, and they would be using them as a way to, like, start that process from happening. That's just, like, how people respond to things like this. And so the fact that none of that is happening and that they're just able to create, like, a fun new school to treat like sex trafficked farming children, how to, like, talk, sort of, and that because they're gay, they're somehow magically, like, have none of the problems that any of the other characters do just because they're gay, and that somehow stops them from being, like, flawed as a human being at all. And that's just so not right. When I was reading this, I was just like, are you kidding me? That, like, I knew, like, we talked about this storyline a couple days before before I read this, and I was just like, I'm like, this is so annoying. I just want them to be able to do something that's, like, a mistake. Like, I just want them to make a mistake. And like, I'm like, so when Patroclus dies, is that, like, the only time that Achilles gets to do something bad? But probably, considering that they use Patroclus as, like, the motivation for him to be doing all these things that are usually seen as bad, like murdering people, they're probably just going to be like, oh, he's just so upset and doesn't know how to handle his feelings because he's actually a child inside. I'm gonna slap somebody. Like Madeline Miller is a really good author, and that's why this stuff is so annoying because I'm like, I can literally see your age. I don't need to even Google how old you are because I know that you are older because of how you are writing this stuff, and it like bothers me so much because the story would be so much better if they were allowed to be like, these complex people that they really are.
Yeah.
Just wish that they could be because it would still be a really great love story, and it's honestly like there's so many like terms in like the queer community with like every group of people of when people get involved in relationships or things because they just have to like hide
Hmm.
like who they really are, and it's literally just like social like survival. Like I forget the exact term for it, but people were talking about it recently that there used to be a term of like gay men and like straight women, or gay men and like lesbians, or it was,
Oh, lavender marriage.
yeah, gay men and like straight women getting married just for like, for insurance benefits or like protections, social protections. And people were talking about it because of all of this stuff going on with Trump, that maybe that'll start just happening again just to piss like straight men off. Like why not do that and just make them mad because you're gay? Like a dude who's gay might be nicer to you than your husband is some of the time. With at least some of the straight dudes that are out there that aren't people that I know. Like I hear wild stories on the internet, and I'm like, is this real? Why? Because my sister's dude would never do this. The stories that I hear about people like not being there for their kids, and like your husband would never do that either. Um, and so that's wild, but it's just there's like words for that for like every sexuality, like for even for asexual people. That's like a thing that we think about of like getting married or being involved with somebody, not because you're like wanting to have sex with them obviously, but you still like love them and you want to have like a partner with you, and you can have that without it being like sexual, I guess is the
Hmm.
best way to put that. But it's also a thing of like just doing that kind of stuff to like fit in so people don't ask too many questions when it's dangerous when you do. And so it's just like weird mixed messages that in this world they're told that they're supposed to want to bang girls when they're in seventh grade. But then with 3 years later, they're just like gay, and people are literally saying out loud basically that they're gay
Yeah.
and nothing happens to them. Nobody does anything to them. Like there are children right here and now getting beat up at school in like now because people think that they might be gay or might be queer or might be something. They don't even know some of the time if they even are. But like these people in this like ultra masculine situation of going to war are allowed to do this and nobody ever challenges them about that. It's just not how any of that stuff would actually happen, and it just feels super weird. It just made it the best way I know how to describe this kind of stuff is that it makes when I see like a author or whoever, a writer, make decisions that I don't think make sense within like the narrative of the story or the characterization of the person, then all I can see is like the writing choices that the author made. And instead of it being feeling like natural, that naturally this is what this character would do because it just makes sense that that's the decision that they would make. I can like see that the author made that choice, and that ruins it because then I'm aware that it's a story. Like you're always aware that it's a story, but I'm very aware that it's a story, and that kind of like ruins it because the fun of when something is written really really well is that you are just so into like the story that you don't think about that stuff until it's happening, or like even when you do you're like, oh, I think this is what's going to happen, and then if it does happen it doesn't feel like bad writing, it just feels like good writing because they set the characters up so well that you guess what they would do because that's what they would do because that's their characterization that's been established this far in the story. And with this sort of thing happening, I just was like, I could like literally like feel her writing this in this way because in her mind, if you're gay, you're like rainbows come out of your ass, I guess, and you don't have any like flaws. And it's just like this weird thing of like wanting them to be such good people that it's like too far. It's like too much. They're not. It doesn't feel like they're real people, and I like wish that they would just she would just let them be more like real people.
Yeah.
It's I just cannot believe that this story ended and like this is how it was.
Yeah, the Bryceus becoming the slave girl, like, TA of Achilles' camp was just, it was not in my expectations, that's for sure.
Even like Agamemnon just like letting them take her and being like, well, I guess since you're gay, you can just take this girl. And
Yeah.
it's just like, oh my god, what is going on in this world? I don't get it. And it's I'm like even more weirdly interested in reading Cersei, even if it slowly but surely kills me to death, because I'm like, okay, oh, hold on. This book is like the romance book, and it has a bunch of trigger warnings about rape. There's one about pedophilia, and it like if you know why there is a thing about pedophilia and it's something that we haven't read yet, can you just like somehow let me know so that I like know that it's still coming? I hope that it's just things that have happened already, but I'm
I
just
mean,
like
if anyone's gonna be a big creep, it's gonna be Agamemnon.
yeah, and I'm just like afraid that something else is going to happen later on that I just like don't know about somehow or we wouldn't know about because of how things get changed around in this story. But it's just like wild how this story has like both of them being raped, but nobody ever talks about it, and they just like move on and continue having like sex with each other, and neither one of them has any effects of showing like that they were fucking raped. But then like people talk about like Cersei as if it's this really good book that shows like kind of somebody having a really traumatic life and what that is like and how she experiences it and how she gets through it all. And people I've heard about that book for years from other like trauma survivors like me who said that they liked reading it because it was like a character that reminded them of them and how they just kind of were like incredibly resilient people and just kind of get through whatever
Mhm.
happens to us somehow. And so I'm just like, how the fuck are these both written by the same author? Like where one of them is making them like I'm like picturing this is like the most random reference that like most of the younger people are not going to get this reference at all, but Charlie and the Unicorns thing from like 2008 on YouTube, like I'm like picturing them like the unicorns when they're all happy and like there's like stars around them when they've just like taken his kidney, and it's just that's how I'm like picturing them at all times, except with stars it's like little rainbows like coming off of them because of how they're written. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
how did the same author write a book about like Cersei being like raped and like incest and all these things, but and that book is about just like getting through horrible trauma, but in this book they're like, what's trauma? Like,
Yeah.
trauma only lasts until Achilles kisses me again, and then I immediately forget about it. Just,
Oh gosh, yeah.
I don't even know. I'm just like, this is, it's just confusing, I guess. And I'm like, she's still an interesting author, and I don't want to stop reading her books, but it is like a fascinating, like, experiment. Um, reading this book at this point, being like, okay, how are you going to get them out of this myth where they have to do bad things? Because that's the entire point of Greek mythology.
Well, and setting it up this way, it's going to be so much more devastating when Bryceus is taken because we are establishing this slave girl school. And we know that that means these poor slave girls aren't going to be protected by Patroclus anymore and their benevolent gaze. And, like, what will they do? And, I mean, like, we knew what was going to happen. If you've read the Iliad, you know Briseis gets taken by Agamemnon because one of his girls gets taken. You know that that's what's happening next. And it's just, at the same time, I don't know. I don't love the way this is set up because why are you making me so invested in her right now? And why is it invested in this way where she's kind of their pet?
Mm-hmm. And she's it's literally like, let's just pat her head, and through the power of like Lady Gaga and Madonna, she will be like healed through our like gay school of gayness. I
don't know what they were thinking.
just keep laughing because that's what it makes me do because I'm just like, this is so like ridiculous in so many ways that I like have a hard time taking it seriously. And I'm like, this is a book about the Troy War. And I'm like laughing when I was reading it. I just like kept stopping and like sighing, like, this is how the story went. Like, I don't even know how to respond. That, like, people, I swear to God, the next person that's like, Percy Jackson ruined Greek mythology because this is a child story and it, like, lessened have you read this book? Have you read this? Have you read Song of Achilles? Have you gotten to the part where they magically don't want to traffic girls, even though they're socially, believed to want to do that just because they're gay? And apparently, if you're gay, you turn into a good person and nobody questions you ever and challenges you about that or like tries
to do it all tongue in cheek and they're not going to actually do anything serious about it.
Or ever like challenge you because you're obviously gay and you're not supposed to be, and so they would like challenge you to a fight or like try to prove, like, Patroclus literally walks around everywhere with Achilles, and is also the other thing he says is, I don't want to fight anybody. Like, he's like a sitting duck. Like, he might as well just be sitting there being like, you should stab me if you want to get Achilles angry at you. Like, that's very obviously what's going on. Like, in the children's book series, like, Annabeth gets attacked sometimes when we get towards the end, especially because she's important to Percy. Like, we haven't read Battle of the Labyrinth yet, obviously, and I'm sure I'm going to have like 17 heart attacks reading that book again as an adult, just from the things that I've seen people reference about how Luke talks about Annabeth in that book, because it's disgusting. But my own interpretation of some of that is that part of the reason why Luke is so disgustingly fixated on Annabeth is because he knows that she's important to Percy, and he's mad and he wants Annabeth to like him more than Percy. And that's why he's like, did you ever love me at the very end? And she's like, no, you're weird. I'm 16 and you're 24. What the? Go find somebody else who's like your age. But like, she obviously doesn't say that, but that's very much the context. She stares right at Percy when he says that to her, and she's like, no, I never felt that way about you. I thought that I did, but I never actually did. And it's like, but I'm like, from like the time after he comes back at the end of Titan's Curse, like, I'm pretty sure that Luke just wants her to want him more than Percy, just to like win over Percy. It's not because of anything to do with Annabeth. And that's how people like this respond to stuff like that. And so it's like, in this world, to see nobody doing that kind of thing, like in the children's book series, people challenge Annabeth because they know she's important to Percy, who is, everyone knows, is the one that everyone is going to go after. And people challenge him all the time. People don't like him for the majority of the books on and off because he is that person, and they know that he is, and they find ways to resent him for it, even though it's not really his fault. They just want to resent him because he's the one that they know is going to have to save everybody, and is the most powerful kid, and is in the middle of every freaking battle ever because he has to be. But in like this adult, more like young adult, but still adult series, nobody challenges Achilles, nobody challenges Patroclus, nobody does anything. Everyone just like sits back and watches them do this, and they're like, it's fine. And I'm like, since when?
That's not how it would go down.
And it's just like, I feel like the best personification of that is the fact that when they take the kidnapped girl who is being sex trafficked, they take her into a tent alone, and that they like you said, they kiss as a way to show that they're like trustworthy. Why the fuck does that mean anything? Like, why does that make them?
It doesn't mean it. It wouldn't have meant anything to, like, it wouldn't have been like, oh, he's gay. No.
Like, no, that doesn't make them more like better people. Gay men can also be little fucks. Like, there's gay men that voted for Trump. Like, I know that makes no sense, but a bunch of them did that. And if they're going to do that, and like, there's been gay, especially white men, that for like years have been like, they're going to go after the queer community soon. And we're like, doofus, they're passing laws against trans people. Do you not think they're part of your community? You obviously don't, since you said that out loud. Thanks for making that clear to everybody else.
Yeah.
But you don't find that stuff scary unless they're personally coming after you, you little idiot. But like, just because you're gay doesn't make you a nicer or better person. And but in this story, it sure does.
Apparently.
It really does, and that's really weird. And it more makes me like worried about how things will be shown like later, much later.
Yeah, how things are gonna play out.
Like, I just don't know how any of that is going to happen, considering that apparently if you're autistic, you never make any mistakes ever and just cry like a baby all the time, even though you're also the
And even when you do make mistakes, it's because you were emotionally manipulated or else you had a good reason.
Or like, I was just trying to protect my boyfriend.
I was told my boyfriend would get my location if
I was just trying to protect my boyfriend. You can't get mad at me. It's like, you impregnated somebody because they raped you, granted, but still, it's just like there's nothing that he can do where he can just like be a.
it's almost insulting at this point that he never has any actual consequences.
Yeah, he should. Like, he's not like an actual god. And I guess this is the thing of what I talk about with the general way that it's not just Percy Jackson that does this, but I just we haven't read or watched something yet that does this the same way. But it's the thing of like in the Percy Jackson books, I always like it. Like, we're gonna talk more about the Ovid stuff next week, and my part of that, I wanted to add in like talking about how we view the gods after the first three Percy Jackson books, and how different they are from like the first book to the end of the third book, to kind of show the differences with like Ovid and Augustus and why people trying to defend Augustus is crazy. But it kind of shows in this book that like because Achilles is a demigod, he's like literally above everybody else. And so people just respect him more, and he doesn't make any mistakes, and he does everything right. He kills everyone the right way. Even Patroclus isn't upset with him for killing innocent people, because I forgot the part where Achilles says like, "Oh, I didn't kill anybody unless they try to kill me first." And I was like, "Oh my fucking
Oh
god!"
yeah, and how easy it was. He talks about how like it's so much easier than I thought it would be. Like they couldn't even touch me. And
It's just like it's this idea of that like in this story, because he's part god, he's like seen as like above everybody else, and so everyone just like naturally just like lets him do things that nobody else would ever be allowed to get away with. And I'm like, that's not what I like about how you talk about people being connected to the gods. Like, shouldn't people be trying to challenge him all the time?
yeah, a lot of the battle stuff doesn't make sense. So initially, and this was in the earlier chapters, and I don't know why I didn't think to say this like earlier, but we know his training. He was trained Achilles in this version in Madeline Miller's lore. Achilles only ever trained by himself, and by himself meaning like he might have fought his teachers, but he's never actually like sparred somebody with weapons with his fists. And the reason that they gave was like, oh, he's just so swift and so impressive that would he train with the other boys his age, would he train with his peers, they would be so defeated they wouldn't even want to fight. That's not how boys work. That's not how fighting works. That's not how training works. Because part of training is going up against people who are slightly better than you. And that's how you get better. And even if it's going against somebody and getting your fucking ass whipped, you're learning. You're learning battle skills.
Like, I was thinking of Ares losing to a 12-year-old in the first Percy Jackson book, but it's like the god of war lost a fight to a 12-year-old sixth grader. Because his like scary ass grandfather like jumps in and stops him in the book version anyway. But either way, he loses both times, and he uses that as a reason to hate Percy forever and always, and it continues to try to fight him through the other books. But it's just that fight is like a thing for Percy because he's like standing up for himself, And the point of the fight is not that Percy's going to win. Like, yes, he is able to like manipulate Ares's anger so that he forgets that he's the literal child of the ocean and just drops a giant wave on his head, which is the smart way to handle something like that. But he doesn't go into that fight expecting to win. He's just doing it because it's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like the idea that like Achilles never fought anyone ever for his entire life, but also the first time he's in battle, he's just good at everything he does.
Yeah.
It's just like that's not that wouldn't actually happen that way. Like you don't just because you're a really powerful demigod doesn't mean that you just know how to do everything right away. But that is how a lot of the like heroes and stuff like that were written when they were written by people that wanted you to just like look up to the gods and love the gods and not like question the gods too much. And that's why I think it bothers me because I'm just like, but I don't respect the gods. I don't like the gods. I don't like them, and there's really no real reason to like them considering that they're all objectively horrible people. That's like literally the point of the gods in the story is that they're the parts of humanity that are always problems in every version of society, no matter how many years go on.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's partly why I always think it never makes any sense to like idealize them or like worship them or look up to them because I'm like, what do you're looking up to like the worst parts of ourselves that we try to talk about in these stories to try to confront them. That's weird, but it is like I guess like the overall sort of veneer of this story is that if you're um, involved with the gods in any way, that's like a good thing, or it makes you better than everyone in a way that is like at this point I need like Thetis and her boy mom self to just like pop in the middle of all of this somehow and be like, I'm magically stopping you guys from stopping anybody from finding these girls so that they don't hurt them or things like that because that would like make more sense, especially considering that they were really aggravated before they even left. Like they couldn't leave for over a month until they murdered a virgin girl. Um, and so it's like they already were mad and like frustrated and angry, and then they show up there and the Trojans already know that they're there, and so they weren't able to surprise them.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of reasons why these people would be aggravated. It's so weird that Agamemnon just like let them take these people,
Yeah.
didn't like do anything else.
It didn't care that they were accumulating this tent full of girls.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just so weird. I don't. It's so weird. I'm gonna read so many articles that Madeline Miller wrote or like interviews with her after we finish this book because I'm like, what's going on?
Yeah.
I just need to know.
I don't quite get it either. Okay, so that takes us to
Like, can you imagine like Nico like popping up at the end of Titan's Curse and being like, actually, I'm not gonna run away into the forest and dramatically run away because I'm gay, and I know that that would be the wrong thing to do, and I don't want to make a mistake because I'm not allowed to make mistakes because I'm the only gay character in this story so far.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I decided to come back and like skip the next book and a half of narrative story that I have because
Angsty, I'm mad at Percy because I was 10 and asked him to make a promise he couldn't keep.
like I'm just going to admit to Percy right here and now that I have a crush on him because why wouldn't I know that already even though I'm only 10?
I don't know. Yeah, so, okay. That's Percy news. That's what we covered in Song of Achilles. But yeah, so next week we were going to talk about Ovid and Augustus, very, very pointedly, because I do need people to realize when you're saying this is propaganda, you shouldn't take it as a real story. What is this propaganda against? What is the leader like? Who we are who we are speaking against? We'll take a look at that next week and really like dive into some Roman Empire stuff.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say that if you spend your time on the internet telling rape survivors that they're not allowed to like a myth because it's not a real myth, you might want to know something about why it was written.
And yeah, I feel like I end up restating this so much because of people wanting to get into these weird little arguments over what counts and does not count as mythology. We are not a Hellenistic polytheist source. We are not here as Hellenistic polytheists. We are not here to talk about Hellenistic paganism in that way. We are here talking about literature and stories. And as stories, they may have been written for a purpose, they may not have been. The purpose may be to explain our world, the purpose may be to talk shit about a politician. Either way, it's valuable. It's the human experience, it's human emotions, and it's something that we can read and look at and say, hey, look at this thing. I understand what it's trying to say.
Like, imagine that you look at something and like can understand, like, reading comprehension wise, what you think the story was trying to tell and how you feel about it. Even if you don't like it, you can still acknowledge it and like talk about it and stuff. Like, what an amazing concept, instead of just telling people that's misinformation.
Yeah.
You know that it can't be misinformation when none of them are real.
Yes, and I mean that's the part I try not to get into because if you want to be a Hellenistic polytheist, so be it. I respect that more than Christianity, even. I'll respect the fuck out of you, but like, do not come at me and try to talk to me as if like I need to have the same relationship with these gods that you have, because I don't. I don't.
I was saying this to a friend of mine tonight, but the problem is that they are trying to Christianize it. Like, they're trying to be like, this is like the one true story, uppercase one true story.
Well, and they don't realize how fucking Roman that is. Okay. I wrote a whole paper on this once. So did you know in Rome when they performed a public sacrifice? So you're leading, let's say, a bunch of cows to an altar to go and like sacrifice them to, let's say, Jupiter, because it's a festival day. If those cows like took a misstep during their ritual, start all over again. You start all over again from the beginning. Your sacrifice participants, even though they're animals, have to be willing, and so they have to go in like they want it. And so you redo it again until they do it that way. That type of perfectionism, that type of superstition, that type of our gods only like one thing and one thing one way is very, very Roman. And you guys are saying you don't like the Romans. You sound a lot like,
Or just the way that they say, like, the thing that they always say that just makes me laugh now is like, that story about Medusa is the Roman version, the Greek version is that. Do you know that nobody tells stories that way? Like the crazy Blake Lively Ryan Reynolds situation. Like, imagine if like I popped up there and was like, actually, the idea that she was sexually harassed by this guy, or that she believed that she was being sexually harassed by this guy, and that he's still going over the top to prove that he wasn't, is actually just Roman mythology. And the idea that she was never abused and he is a little puppy on the floor crying to his mommy is Greek mythology. You can't agree with both of those. Those are two different kinds of mythology. You have to choose one, and that is the only kind that you can talk. That is crazy. And that is like how they are talking about these stories. There is no one true myth for any myth. Every single myth has 47 different versions or adaptations or whatever of every story, because that is how stories are passed. Like, every time the old blogs that Rick Riordan posted, where he would be talking about some of those things, he would always talk about how there's like a million different versions of all of these different myths. And so it's hard for him to explain like why he chose a certain one, besides that it just worked best within his story, that he like just liked that one best or whatever, because there's so many different ones that it's like it's impossible to say this is the one way that it happened, because that's not how anyone talks about stuff. Like, there are people on the internet right now who think polar opposite opinions about public figures constantly. There's like 17 different stories about just like an influencer on TikTok that doesn't even matter, and everyone has a different opinion about them at the same time. But like, people expect you to just say this is like the one myth that happened and there's no other story, and every other story that says anything different is misinformation. That's just not how people talk about this stuff. Like it would be laughable to find somebody who taught like a class about this, or even somebody like Rick Riordan who like taught kids. And I just imagine him up there being like Medusa as a SA survivor is only Roman mythology, so I can't teach you about that. Like what? Like this is a Greek mythology TV show, and he put that into his show because he wanted it to be there specifically. And so if he can like not bat a single fucking eye when that was literally his job, teaching kids Greek mythology for many years of his life, and wrote an entire book and made this his entire life,
Mhm.
and he doesn't care, like why are you being so weird about all of this? Um, I just wish that they would stop being Christian about it. Like there is
Yeah.
no one true. It's the mix of that and then like feeling like they are allowed to tell other people how they should believe purely because it's what they believe. And it's because it's like it doesn't actually, like me believing that Athena is a bitch, or that or that Medusa is like a rape survivor. If you don't believe that, me believing that affects your life in no possible way.
I have to get like Jake's texting me to get William to bed, but so really quick, I'm gonna leave us on some words from Ovid just because I put them in your comments, but like I want this to be clippable. So this is at the very end of the Metamorphoses. This is what Ovid says. My work is finished now. No wrath of Jove, nor sword, no fire, nor futurity is capable of laying waste to it. Let that day come then when it wishes to, which only has my body in its power, and put an end to my uncertain years. No matter, for in spirit I will be borne up to soar beyond the distant stars, immortal in the name I leave behind. Wherever Roman governance extends over the subject nations of the world, my words will be upon the people's lips, and if there is truth in poets' prophecies, then in my fame forever will I live. So just he's like, you're gonna have to live with this word forever, forever and ever.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. So can't take it back. It's all here. You have to live with it. I just love that he put that at the end, so I had to say that out loud. But we'll do a deep dive into that next week and some more. I was just gonna say Sons of Anarchy because I know I put the abbreviation SOA, the Song of Achilles next week.
Bye.
Bye.